When my wife died in what looked like a car accident, my son Carl showed up to her funeral 45 minutes late, walked straight past her casket, and asked me where I kept the passwords to our digital accounts. That's when I knew Dorothy didn't just die, she was murdered. My name is Harold Reynolds, I'm 59 years old, and for the past 15 years I've made my living as a cybersecurity consultant. I've helped Fortune 500 companies protect themselves from hackers, identity thieves, and corporate espionage. I know how to read digital footprints the way a tracker reads animal prints in the woods, but I never thought I'd need to use those skills to investigate my own family. The morning of Dorothy's funeral was gray and humid, the kind of Texas weather that makes your shirt stick to your back before you've even walked to the mailbox, St. Matthew's Episcopal Church sat on a tree-lined street in North Dallas, its red brick facade weathered by 40 years of Texas summers. The sanctuary was packed with Dorothy's nursing colleagues from Dallas Children's Hospital, neighbors from our street, and friends from the book club she'd run for 12 years. Dorothy had been a pediatric nurse for 23 years. She saved kids' lives every day, came home exhausted but happy, and never asked for anything more than a quiet evening and a cup of chamomile tea. The church smelled like lilies and old wood polish, the kind of smell that's supposed to bring comfort but just reminded me how final this all was. I sat in the front pew in my best black suit, the one Dorothy had picked out for me 3 Christmases ago, staring at the mahogany casket that held my wife of 34 years. The funeral director had done his best, but you could still see the damage from the crash. They'd had to use a closed casket. The accident had happened on a Tuesday morning at 7:43 a.m. Dorothy was driving to work on Highway 75, same route she'd taken for over 2 decades, when her car suddenly accelerated through a red light, crashed through the guardrail, and rolled down a 30-foot embankment. The police said the brake system had failed catastrophically. These things happen with older cars, they told me, mechanical failure, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. But Dorothy's car wasn't that old, a $201 1E19 Honda Civic with only 47,000 miles on it. I'd had it serviced at the Honda dealership just 3 months earlier. The mechanic had given it a clean bill of health. Everything was fine. The brakes were fine. The service was supposed to start at 10 a.m. sharp. Pastor Williams, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, had known our family for 8 years. He stood at the podium in his black robes, checking his watch and glancing toward the back of the church. By 10:15, he was looking at me with raised eyebrows. By 10:30, I was checking my phone and looking toward the entrance myself. Carl was nowhere to be seen. This was his mother's funeral, and he couldn't be bothered to show up on time. Dorothy had always made excuses for Carl's behavior. He was busy with work. He was stressed about money. He was going through a rough patch with Beverly. But there's no excuse for being late to your own mother's funeral. At 10:45, the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary banged open with a sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Every head in the church turned. Carl walked in wearing an expensive charcoal gray suit I'd never seen before, followed by his wife, Beverly. She was in a tight black dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party than a funeral, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the humidity. Carl didn't look around for me. He didn't acknowledge the congregation of family friends who'd known him since he was a kid. He pulled out his iPhone, the newest model, I noticed, and started typing while walking down the center aisle. His thumbs moved frantically across the screen, like whatever he was texting couldn't wait another 5 minutes. I wanted to grab that phone and throw it against the nearest wall. But this was Dorothy's send-off, and I wasn't going to cause a scene in God's house. Carl slid into the pew next to me without a word. No hug, no squeeze on the shoulder, no sorry for your loss, Dad. He smelled like expensive cologne mixed with stress sweat, and his leg was bouncing up and down like he'd had too much caffeine. Beverly sat next to him, immediately pulling out a small compact mirror to check her makeup. Pastor Williams began the eulogy, talking about Dorothy's dedication to helping sick children, her volunteer work at the North Dallas Animal Shelter, her kindness to everyone she met. He told the story about how Dorothy had once driven 2 hours to deliver Christmas presents to a former patient's family when they couldn't afford gifts. I tried to focus on his words, but I kept glancing sideways at my son. Carl was still texting. The blue light from his screen reflected off his face in the dim church lighting. His jaw was clenched tight, and there was a thin line of sweat on his forehead despite the air conditioning. When Pastor Williams asked if anyone wanted to share memories of Dorothy, several people stood up. Mrs. Patterson from the hospital talked about Dorothy's dedication to her young patients. Our neighbor Mike Rodriguez mentioned how Dorothy had brought soup to his family when his wife had surgery. Beverly's own sister Carmen flew in from Phoenix and spoke about Dorothy's warm welcome when Carl and Beverly got married. Carl never stood up. He never shared a memory. He just kept typing on his phone like he was conducting business during his mother's funeral. The service ended with a hymn, Amazing Grace, Dorothy's favorite. As the congregation filed out, people came by to offer condolences, to squeeze my hand to tell me how sorry they were for my loss. I thanked them all, but I couldn't stop watching Carl. He was pacing by the exit doors, checking his watch every 30 seconds like he had somewhere important to be. We moved to the fellowship hall for the luncheon. The church ladies had outdone themselves, preparing all of Dorothy's favorite foods: fried chicken with the crispy coating she loved, green bean casserole with those crunchy onions on top, cornbread with real butter, and pecan pie that would have made her cry with happiness. The hall was decorated with white tablecloths and small arrangements of yellow roses, Dorothy's favorite flower. The smell should have been comforting, should have brought back memories of church potlucks and family dinners. Instead, it just made my stomach churn with anxiety. I was accepting condolences from Dorothy's co-workers when Carl appeared at my elbow. He didn't wait for the conversation to end. He just stepped between me and Mrs. Patterson from the pediatric ICU, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Dad, we need to talk," he said. "About Mom's accounts." Mrs. Patterson looked embarrassed and excused herself, patting my arm before walking away. I turned to face my son. Up close, I could see he'd lost weight. His face was gaunt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that makeup couldn't hide. His expensive suit hung loose on his frame like he'd borrowed it from someone bigger. "What accounts?" I asked. "Her investment accounts? Her life insurance. Passwords to her laptop and phone. We need to get all that squared away before it becomes a legal mess." I stared at him. Dorothy wasn't even in the ground yet. The graveside service was scheduled for 2 p.m., and here was my son talking about money and passwords like we were dividing up the office supplies after a corporate layoff. "Carl, your mother isn't even buried yet." "I know, Dad, but these things have time limits. If we don't act fast, the accounts could get frozen by probate court. Insurance companies have deadlines. Investment portfolios have maintenance fees. I'm just trying to protect the family assets." Beverly appeared beside him, nodding agreement. She was carrying a yellow legal pad and had somehow produced a pen from her tiny purse. "Harold, I know it's difficult, but Carl's right. We need to be practical about these things. The longer we wait, the more complicated it gets." I looked around the fellowship hall. Dorothy's friends were eating lunch, sharing stories about her life, celebrating her memory. Mrs. Rodriguez from down the street was showing people pictures of the garden Dorothy had helped her plant last spring. The book club ladies were talking about the mystery novel Dorothy had been reading. She'd never find out who the killer was. And my son was treating it like a business meeting. "I don't have any passwords." I lied. "Your mother handled all the computer stuff." Carl's jaw tightened. I saw that familiar twitch in his left eye, the same tell he'd had since childhood when he was stressed or lying. "Come on, Dad. You're a cybersecurity expert. You're telling me you don't know how to get into her accounts. I'm telling you I'm not discussing this today." Carl stepped closer, lowering his voice so the other mourners couldn't hear. "Look, I know you're grieving, but you need to think clearly here. Mom had life insurance, investment accounts, retirement funds. If we don't access them properly, we could lose everything to taxes and fees." There was something in his tone that set off alarm bells in my head. Carl had never shown interest in our family finances before. Growing up, he'd been terrible with money, constantly overdrawn on his checking account, maxing out credit cards, asking us for loans he never paid back. He'd borrowed money from us more than once over the years, for his wedding, for Beverly's medical bills when she had her gallbladder surgery, for what he called investment opportunities that never seemed to materialize. But he'd never talked about inheritance or life insurance. How did he even know Dorothy had life insurance? "How did you know about life insurance?" I asked. "Mom mentioned it once. Look, Dad, I'm just trying to help. You shouldn't have to deal with all this financial stuff while you're mourning." I studied his face. Carl had been a decent liar since he was a kid, stealing cookies from the jar, but I'd learned to read people in my line of work. There were tells you couldn't hide if you knew what to look for. The way his left eye twitched when he was under pressure. How he touched his nose when he wasn't telling the truth. How his voice got slightly higher when he was desperate. All three tells were firing right now. "We'll talk about it later," I said. "Today is about your mother." Carl's mask slipped for just a second. I saw a flash of pure anger cross his face before he forced it back into a concerned son expression. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, then relaxed. "Fine," he said, through gritted teeth. "But don't wait too long. These things can't sit forever." Beverly was scribbling notes on her legal pad. I caught a glimpse of what she was writing: life insurance, deadline, and investment accounts, access needed. They walked away, heads together, whispering urgently about something. I watched them through the crowd of mourners. Carl was agitated, pacing in small circles while Beverly took more notes. Every few seconds, he'd pull out his phone and check it, like he was expecting an important call or text message. Pastor Williams approached with a gentle smile. "Harold, how are you holding up?" "About as well as can be expected, Pastor." Dorothy was a special woman. The work she did with our youth group, the meals she prepared for new families, she had a servant's heart. She did. I wanted you to know that several people have asked about setting up a memorial fund in her honor, perhaps something for the children's hospital where she worked. Before I could answer, Carl was back at my side. "Memorial fund? What kind of memorial fund?" Pastor Williams looked surprised by the interruption. "Just something to honor your mother's memory. A scholarship for nursing students, perhaps, or funding for the pediatric ward." "That sounds expensive," Beverly said, appearing with her legal pad. "Wouldn't it be better to wait until we know what the family's financial situation looks like?" Pastor Williams blinked. "Well, I suppose that would be practical." "Exactly," Carl said. "We need to be smart about this. No point in making financial commitments until we know what we're working with." I felt heat rising in my face. "Carl, people want to honor your mother. The amount of money isn't the point. Everything's about money, Dad. You should understand that better than anyone." The fellowship hall suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of people. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to get away from my son before I said something I'd regret in front of Dorothy's friends. "Excuse me," I said to Pastor Williams. "I need to step outside for a minute." I walked through the side door into the church parking lot. The Texas heat hit me like a wall, but it was better than the suffocating atmosphere inside. I leaned against my pickup truck, a 2015 Ford F-15T that Dorothy had always said was too big for just the two of us, and tried to make sense of what was happening. My wife was dead, my son was acting like a stranger, and something was very, very wrong with the whole situation. I pulled out my phone and called George Thompson, my oldest friend and business partner. George was 65, semi-retired from his consulting firm, and the closest thing I had to a brother. We'd served together in the Army Reserves in our younger days, started our consulting businesses around the same time, and had been through divorces, deaths, and disasters together. If anyone would listen to a wild theory about my son, it would be George. "Harold," he answered on the second ring. His voice was gentle but concerned. "How did the service go, George? Something's not right." "What do you mean, Carl? He's not grieving. He's not even pretending to grieve. He showed up late, spent the whole service on his phone, and now he's asking about Dorothy's financial accounts. People handle grief differently, Harold. Maybe he's just, no, this isn't grief. This is something else. Can you meet me at the house after the burial? I think I need to show you something." George was quiet for a long moment. "What kind of something? I can't explain it over the phone. Just trust me on this. Can you be there around 4? Of course." "Harold, are you sure you're thinking clearly? Losing Dorothy was a shock, and sometimes grief can make us see things that aren't." "I'm thinking clearly, George." Maybe for the first time since this whole thing started, the burial service at Restland Memorial Cemetery was mercifully brief. Pastor Williams said a few words about dust and ashes while 30 people stood around the gravesite in the afternoon heat. Dorothy's casket was lowered into the red Texas clay, while her sister Carmen sobbed quietly into a tissue. Carl stood next to me during the service, but he might as well have been on Mars. He checked his phone twice during the prayer, shifted his weight constantly like he had somewhere urgent to be, and kept glancing at his watch. When Pastor Williams threw the first handful of dirt onto the casket, Carl was already turning away. "Dad," he said as the crowd began to disperse, "I'll call you tomorrow. We really need to deal with those account issues." Beverly was pulling him toward their car, a new Audi sedan I'd never seen before. "Where did you get that car?" I asked. "Lease," Carl said quickly. "Company car." I'd never known Carl's IT company to provide company cars, but I didn't push it, not yet. I drove home alone through the empty streets of North Dallas. Our house on Maple Street looked smaller somehow, like it had shrunk while I was gone. The yard needed mowing. The newspaper was still in the driveway from Tuesday morning, waterlogged from yesterday's rain. Dorothy's Honda Civic wasn't in the garage anymore. It was sitting in a police impound lot, waiting to be released back to our insurance company. The house felt like a tomb. Dorothy's coffee mug was still in the sink from Tuesday morning, lipstick marks on the rim. Her reading glasses were on the kitchen counter next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. Tuesday's newspaper was folded to the arts section. She'd been planning to read a review of some play at the Dallas Theater Center. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, frozen in time. I sat in my recliner in the living room and tried to make sense of what had happened. Dorothy's sudden death, Carl's strange behavior, the urgency about passwords and financial accounts, the new car, the expensive suit, the weight loss and dark circles under his eyes. None of it added up to normal grief. That's when I remembered Dorothy's laptop was still in our home office upstairs. If Carl was so interested in her digital accounts, maybe I should take a look myself. The office was our shared workspace, 2 desks facing opposite walls in what used to be a spare bedroom. My desk was cluttered with client files and computer equipment. Dorothy's desk was neat and organized, everything in its proper place. Her laptop was a silver MacBook Air she'd bought 2 years ago for work schedules, email, online banking, and managing our household finances. I knew her password because we'd set it up together, Nurse Life 2022. Dorothy wasn't particularly tech-savvy, but she was smart enough to use secure passwords after I'd lectured her about identity theft. I opened the laptop and clicked on her email. Most of it was routine, hospital communications, newsletters from nursing organizations, spam from retailers. But as I scrolled through recent messages, something caught my attention. 3 weeks ago, Dorothy had received an email from First National Bank about unusual login activity on her investment account. The email said someone had accessed her account from an unrecognized device at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday night and recommended she change her password immediately. Dorothy had forwarded that email to herself with a note. Need to ask Harold about this. Who would be trying to access my investment account? But she'd never asked me. Why? I kept digging. In her deleted items folder, I found more emails she'd apparently thought better of sending. Draft messages to her sister Carmen about strange phone calls and feeling watched. One draft was titled, "Should I Be Worried?" But the body was blank, like she'd started to write something and then stopped. The last draft was dated Monday, the day before her accident. The subject line was "Just in case." I clicked it open. The message was addressed to me. Harold, I don't know if I'm being paranoid, but some things have been happening that don't feel right. Carl has been asking a lot of questions about our finances. He wanted to know about my investment accounts, how much money we have saved, whether we've updated our wills recently. When I told him it wasn't his concern, he got angry. Really angry. He said I was being secretive and that he had a right to know about the family assets since he's our only child. Last week I caught him going through my purse when he thought I was asleep. He said he was looking for antacids, but my purse was on the kitchen counter and we keep the medicine cabinet stocked upstairs. Yesterday my computer password stopped working. When I reset it, the system said someone had tried to log in with the wrong password 23 times in the past week. I'm starting to think Carl might be trying to access my accounts without permission. I know he's had money problems in the past, but this feels different, more desperate. I'm going to change all my passwords again and maybe talk to you about setting up better security. I just don't want to accuse our son of something without being sure. But Harold, I'm scared. Not of Carl exactly, but of what he might do if he's really as desperate as he seems. If something happens to me, the draft ended there. Dorothy had never finished typing whatever she was thinking. My blood ran cold. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. I read the draft again, then a third time hoping I'd misunderstood something. But there was no misunderstanding. Dorothy had been afraid of our son. She'd suspected Carl was trying to access her financial accounts. She'd caught him going through her personal belongings, and she'd been planning to tell me about all of it, but she'd never gotten the chance. I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the window, I saw George Thompson climbing out of his silver Buick sedan. George was a big man, 6'4", with silver hair and hands the size of dinner plates. He'd been a mechanical engineer before getting into business consulting, and he had the kind of practical mind that didn't jump to conclusions. I needed that practical mind right now because my own mind was jumping to conclusions that would destroy my family forever. I met George at the front door. He was carrying a bottle of bourbon and wearing the concerned expression of a man who'd buried his own wife 5 years earlier. "How are you holding up?" he asked, giving me a bear hug that nearly cracked my ribs. "George, I need you to look at something, and I need you to tell me if I'm losing my mind." I led him upstairs to the office and showed him Dorothy's laptop. I walked him through what I'd found. The unusual login attempts, the deleted drafts, the unfinished email that read like a cry for help. George read everything twice, then sat back in his chair and poured 2 glasses of bourbon. "Harold, this is deeply concerning. Tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me this doesn't look like what?" I took a deep breath, like Dorothy was murdered. George's whiskey glass froze halfway to his lips. He set it down carefully and looked at me with the kind of expression you'd give someone who just claimed they'd seen Elvis at the grocery store. Harold, that's a hell of an accusation. You're talking about your son murdering his mother. I know how it sounds, but look at the timeline. Dorothy starts getting worried about Carl's interest in money. Her computer gets hacked. Someone tries to access her bank accounts. Then she dies in a convenient accident that leaves me as the sole beneficiary of her life insurance. George stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard where Dorothy's vegetable garden was already starting to wilt in the heat. How much life insurance? $500,000 plus she apparently had investment accounts I didn't even know about. Carl mentioned millions. George whistled low. That's serious money. Serious motive. And Carl showed up to the funeral asking about passwords, not to comfort me, not to grieve his mother. He wanted access to her accounts. What are you thinking? That he somehow caused the car accident? I walked over to my desk and pulled out a folder I'd been avoiding since Tuesday. Dorothy's car was a 2019 Honda Civic, fully loaded with all the latest safety technology. Bluetooth connectivity, GPS navigation, automatic emergency braking, collision avoidance. All of that runs through the car's central computer system. George turned from the window. You think someone hacked her car? It's not just possible, George. It's probable. Modern cars are basically smartphones on wheels. If someone could access the onboard computer system, they could potentially override the brakes, control the acceleration, disable safety features. That requires serious technical expertise. Carl has a computer science degree from UT. He runs an IT consulting company, and he's been asking about Dorothy's financial accounts since before she died. George poured himself another whiskey and sat back down. Walk me through it. How would it work? I'd been thinking about this since I found Dorothy's drafts. Modern cars connect to the internet for GPS updates, traffic information, emergency services. That creates entry points. If someone could infiltrate the car's network, they could send commands to critical systems. The brakes, the accelerator, the steering. The police report said Dorothy's car accelerated through a red light instead of stopping. The brake pedal was completely unresponsive. That's not normal mechanical failure, George. That's system override. George was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told him. This is a massive accusation, Harold. If you're right, Carl didn't just steal money or commit fraud. He executed his own mother. I know. What do you want to do about it? I want to prove it, one way or the other. How? I'd been thinking about that too. We set a trap. Over the next hour, George and I worked out a plan. It was risky, and it required me to act like a grieving widower who was overwhelmed by technology and finances. Given that I'd spent 15 years as a cybersecurity consultant, that was going to be a stretch. But if Carl really was responsible for Dorothy's death, I needed him to reveal his hand. The key is making him think I'm helpless, I explained. Carl knows I understand computers, but he also knows I'm 59 and just lost my wife. If I play confused and desperate, he might get overconfident. What about evidence? I'll install monitoring software on Dorothy's laptop. If Carl tries to access it remotely, I'll have a record. IP addresses, timestamps, keystrokes, everything. George nodded slowly, and if he doesn't take the bait, then maybe I'm wrong about everything. But George, I don't think I am. The way he acted at the funeral, the questions about money, the timing of everything, it all points to someone who knew Dorothy was going to die. The next morning I called Carl at 8:30 a.m. I'd practiced my script, making sure I sounded overwhelmed and confused. Carl? It's Dad. I'm really struggling here. Dad, what's wrong? You sound terrible. I've been trying to deal with all of Dorothy's accounts and paperwork, and I'm completely lost. Insurance forms, bank statements, computer passwords. I don't even know where to start. I could hear the excitement in his voice, poorly disguised as concern. I told you I'd help with that, Dad. Why don't Beverly and I come over this afternoon? We can go through everything together, would you? I'd really appreciate it. I feel like I'm drowning in all this financial stuff. Of course we'll be there at 2 p.m. Dad, try not to worry. We'll get it all sorted out. After I hung up, I spent the morning installing monitoring software on Dorothy's laptop. The program was invisible to normal users, but would record every keystroke, every website visit, every login attempt. If Carl tried to access Dorothy's accounts remotely, I'd have detailed evidence. I also set up small digital cameras in the living room and kitchen, disguised as normal household items, a pen holder on the bookshelf, a picture frame on the counter. If Carl tried to pressure me in person, I'd have video evidence. George came over at noon to help test the surveillance equipment. You sure about this, Harold? If you're wrong, you're essentially spying on your own son. If I'm wrong, then the worst thing that happens is I waste some time and learn that my son is just bad at showing grief. If I'm right. If you're right, you're gathering evidence to put him in prison for the rest of his life. George, someone killed Dorothy. Someone hacked her computer, accessed her accounts, and then murdered her to cover it up. If it wasn't Carl, then who? George checked his watch. They'll be here in 2 hours. You ready for this? I've been ready since Tuesday morning. Carl and Beverly arrived at exactly 2 p.m., which should have been my first clue that something was off. Carl was never on time for anything, but he was carrying a leather briefcase and Beverly had that yellow legal pad again. They meant business. Hi, Dad, Carl said, giving me a brief hug that felt rehearsed. How are you holding up? Not well. I didn't sleep last night. Every time I tried to log into one of your mother's accounts, I got error messages. I don't understand any of this computer stuff. Beverly sat down at Dorothy's desk without being invited. Harold, let's start with the basics. Do you have a list of her accounts? I found some statements in her filing cabinet, but most of it seems to be online. I don't know any of the passwords. Carl was already eyeing Dorothy's laptop. That's okay, Dad. We can work around that. What about her computer? Maybe she saved the passwords in her browser. I handed him the MacBook. She's got it password protected. I tried a few obvious things but couldn't get in. Carl's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. I watched him try several combinations. Dorothy's birthday, our anniversary, common passwords. Nothing worked. She must have used something random, Carl said. But I could see the frustration in his eyes. Beverly looked up from her legal pad. Can't you bypass it somehow? You're the computer expert. It's not that simple, Carl said, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. Actually, Dad, there might be a way. If I could take the laptop back to my office, I could run some specialized software that might crack the password. Is that legal? It's Dorothy's laptop, Dad. You inherited it. Technically, you own it now, and you're giving me permission to access it. I pretended to wrestle with the decision. I don't know, Carl. It feels like I'm violating your mother's privacy, Dad. She's gone, and if there are financial accounts we don't know about, we could be losing money every day we wait. Insurance companies have deadlines. Investment accounts charge maintenance fees. The longer we wait, the more expensive this gets. Beverly nodded emphatically. Harold, Carl just wants to protect the family assets. Dorothy would want that too. I handed over the laptop, making sure I looked reluctant. Okay, but please be careful with it. It's all I have left of her digital life. Of course, Dad. I'll take excellent care of it. After they left, I called George. They took the bait, I told him. Carl's got Dorothy's laptop. If he's the one who was trying to hack her accounts, he'll probably access them tonight. How will you know? The monitoring software I installed will track everything. If Carl accesses any websites or accounts, I'll have a complete record. And if he doesn't, then maybe I'm wrong about everything. But George, something tells me I'm not going to be disappointed. I spent that evening in my garage, pretending to organize Dorothy's gardening tools while actually testing the digital surveillance equipment. The monitoring software would send alerts to my phone whenever someone accessed Dorothy's laptop remotely. The hidden cameras were motion activated and would record to encrypted files on my secure server. At 11:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert. Someone was accessing Dorothy's computer. I sat in my truck in the garage watching the real-time data stream on my phone. The user had successfully cracked Dorothy's password, something I'd made deliberately easier by installing a backdoor in the monitoring software. Now I could see everything they were doing. First, they navigated to Dorothy's email and deleted several messages. Then they accessed her bank website and logged into her checking account. From there, they moved to her investment portfolio, accounts I'd never known existed. The numbers on the screen made my breath catch. Dorothy had been far more successful with investments than I'd ever imagined. Multiple stock portfolios, municipal bonds, a money market account, and CDs. The total was staggering, over $230 million, but what really caught my attention was what the user did next. They didn't just look at the financial accounts. They searched Dorothy's computer for specific files. Documents related to her car, emails about the accident, any evidence that she might have suspected her vehicle had been tampered with. That search told me everything I needed to know. An innocent person helping with estate planning wouldn't be looking for evidence about car troubles. Only the person responsible for the accident would be worried about what Dorothy might have discovered. The user was logged in for 2 hours and 18 minutes. They downloaded bank statements, copied password files, and accessed every financial account Dorothy had. But they made one critical mistake. They also installed new malware on the laptop, designed to give them permanent remote access. I screenshot everything and backed up the data to 3 different secure servers. At 2:05 a.m., the user finally logged off. I had everything I needed to prove Carl had been hacking Dorothy's computer, but I still needed evidence linking him to the car accident. The next morning, Carl called at 7:30 a.m. He sounded excited, almost breathless. "Dad, great news. I got into Mom's laptop. Really? How did you manage that?" "Trade secrets," he said with a laugh that sounded forced. "But Dad, you're not going to believe what I found. Mom had way more money than we thought." "What do you mean?" "Investment accounts, stock portfolios, bonds. She was like a secret millionaire. The total is around $2.8 million. I nearly dropped the phone. Carl had just confessed to accessing Dorothy's accounts, and he'd inflated the numbers by $500,000. Why would he lie about the amount unless he was planning to skim off the difference? "That's incredible," I managed. "I had no idea." "Yeah, but here's the problem, Dad. Some of these accounts require two-factor authentication. They send security codes to Mom's cell phone, which obviously doesn't work anymore. And the investment accounts are time sensitive. If we don't transfer them soon, you could lose a lot of money to penalties and fees." There it was, the hook. Carl wasn't trying to help me access Dorothy's money. He was trying to get control of it himself. "What do you suggest?" "I think we need to move fast. I can help you transfer everything into new accounts under your name. But I'll need you to sign some forms, and we'll have to act quickly before the banks start freezing assets." "That sounds complicated." "It is complicated, Dad. That's why you need professional help. Can you meet me at my office this afternoon? I have better computer equipment there, and my business partner can notarize the documents." Carl's office was in a strip mall on Forest Lane, sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The building was typical Dallas commercial architecture, beige stucco, with tinted windows and a flat roof that probably leaked every time it rained. The sign outside said Advanced IT Solutions in faded blue letters. I'd never been to Carl's office before. In fact, I'd never been entirely clear on what his business actually did. Whenever I asked about work, he gave vague answers about IT consulting and systems integration. I arrived at 3 p.m. carrying a briefcase that contained nothing but blank papers and a digital recorder. Carl met me at the door, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen him. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and he had coffee stains on his shirt. "Thanks for coming, Dad. This will be much easier with my equipment here." The office was smaller than I'd expected, just a reception area with no receptionist and 2 back rooms. The carpet was worn and stained, and the whole place smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. This didn't look like a successful IT consulting business. Carl led me to the back room where Beverly was sitting at a computer workstation. The desk was cluttered with energy drink cans and fast food containers. Multiple monitors showed what looked like bank account login pages. "Okay, Dad, here's what we need to do," Carl said, pulling out a stack of legal documents. "These forms will give me power of attorney for financial matters. That way I can manage all of Mom's accounts without having to bother you for signatures every time we need to move money." I looked at the documents. They were legitimate legal forms, but they would essentially give Carl complete control over Dorothy's entire estate. My estate now. I don't know Carl. This seems like a big step. "Dad, you're 59 years old and you just lost your wife. You shouldn't have to worry about managing almost $3 million in investments. Let me handle the financial stress while you focus on grieving." Beverly looked up from her computer. "Harold, we've already accessed 3 of Dorothy's accounts. If we don't transfer the money in the next few days, the banks will freeze everything pending probate. That could take months and cost thousands in legal fees." "Besides," Carl added, his voice getting more urgent, "it's not like I'm stealing anything. Your family. What's good for me is good for you." I pretended to consider the paperwork while actually studying Carl's behavior. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. His left eye was twitching constantly. He kept checking his phone every few seconds like he was expecting an important call. "Carl, can I ask you something?" "Sure, Dad. How did you know about all these investment accounts? Dorothy never mentioned them to me." Carl hesitated for just a moment too long. She talked to Beverly about them. "Woman stuff, you know. Mom was worried about making sure the family was taken care of." "When did she tell Beverly this?" Beverly jumped in quickly. "A few weeks ago. We were talking about financial planning, and Dorothy mentioned she'd been investing in stocks. She was proud of how well she'd done. I nodded like this made sense." And she never mentioned being worried about anything else, problems with her car maybe. Carl went completely still. Problems with her car. What do you mean? Just thinking about the accident, Dorothy was such a careful driver. It's strange that her brakes would fail so suddenly. Brake failure happens, Dad, especially with older cars. All that stop-and-go traffic puts stress on the systems, but the police report said the car actually accelerated through the intersection, like someone had pressed the gas pedal instead of the brake. Carl was sweating heavily now. Dad, what are you getting at? I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I had Dorothy's car examined by a private investigator. The brake lines were fine, no mechanical failure, but the car's computer system showed signs of external access. The color drained from Carl's face, external access. Someone hacked into Dorothy's car and overrode the safety systems, the same way someone had been trying to hack into her financial accounts for the past month. Beverly stood up so fast she knocked over her chair. Carl? What is he talking about? I don't know, Carl said, but his voice was shaking. Dad, you're not making sense. You think someone murdered Mom by hacking her car? That sounds crazy. I opened the folder and laid out printed screenshots of the laptop monitoring data. These are logs from Dorothy's computer. Someone accessed it remotely 2 nights ago and searched through all her accounts. The same IP address that was trying to break into her bank accounts before she died. Carl stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Where did you get this? I've been a cybersecurity consultant for 15 years, Carl. Did you really think I wouldn't know how to monitor my own wife's computer? The mask finally slipped. Carl's fake concern evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. He looked at the computer screens, then at Beverly, then back at me. I could see him weighing his options, denial, anger, or truth. How long have you known, he asked quietly. Since the day of the funeral, when you showed up asking about passwords instead of offering condolences. Carl sat down heavily in his desk chair. The expensive suit that had looked so sharp at the funeral now made him look like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. Dad, you don't understand. I was in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? Money trouble. Bad money trouble. Beverly was backing toward the door. Carl, stop talking. We should call a lawyer. It's too late, Beverly. He already knows. Carl looked at me with something that might have been relief. I owed money to some very dangerous people, Dad. How much money? $800,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $800,000. Carl, what did you do? Cryptocurrency trading, day trading, really. I thought I could make enough to pay off my credit cards and maybe have some left over for a house down payment. But the market crashed in February and I lost everything. You gambled away $800,000? It wasn't gambling, Dad. It was investing. I had a system, algorithms that were supposed to predict market movements, but the whole crypto market collapsed and I was leveraged too heavily. Beverly was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. Carl, please stop. The people I borrowed from weren't patient, Carl continued, ignoring her. They wanted their money back with interest. When I couldn't pay, they started making threats. What kind of threats? Physical threats. They showed me pictures of what they do to people who don't pay their debts, broken bones, missing fingers. They said I had 30 days to come up with the money or they'd start with Beverly. I felt sick, so you decided to steal from your mother. I didn't want to steal from her, Dad. I just needed temporary access to her accounts. I thought if I could borrow some of her investment money, I could pay off the debt and then gradually put the money back before anyone noticed. But she changed her passwords. Yeah, and she started asking questions. She figured out someone was trying to access her accounts. So you killed her. Carl flinched like I'd slapped him. I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to scare her into giving me the passwords by hacking her car. I downloaded some software from the dark web. It was supposed to just make her car act up a little. Make her think she was having brake problems so she'd be more dependent on me for help. I thought if she was scared to drive, she'd let me handle more of her errands, and I could gradually convince her to give me access to her accounts. But you overrode the brakes completely. The software was more aggressive than I expected. It was supposed to just make the car jerk a little when she tried to stop. But when Mom tried to brake that Tuesday morning, the system accelerated instead of slowing down. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I stared at my son, this stranger wearing my son's face. You watched your mother die in a car crash you caused. I didn't watch anything. I was at home when it happened. I saw the news report and thought maybe someone else had hacked her car. It wasn't until I accessed her computer that I realized the malware I'd installed had malfunctioned. And instead of going to the police, you decided to cover it up and steal her money anyway. Carl's face hardened. She was already dead, Dad. Nothing I said was going to bring her back, and I still owed $800,000 to people who would kill me if I didn't pay. So you came to the funeral looking for passwords? I thought you'd be too grief-stricken to think clearly. I figured I could access Mom's accounts, transfer enough money to pay my debts, and then gradually put it back over time. You'd never have to know. Beverly had stopped crying and was staring at Carl with horror. You told me your mother died in an accident. You never said you caused it. Beverly, I can explain. You murdered your own mother for gambling money. It wasn't murder, it was an accident. I never meant for her to die. I looked at Carl sitting in his cheap office chair, surrounded by the debris of his failed business and his failed life. What happened to your IT company, Carl? This place looks like it's going out of business. We lost our biggest client 6 months ago, haven't had steady income since then. The cryptocurrency trading was supposed to fix everything, so you're broke. Worse than broke. The lease on this office is 3 months behind. Beverly's car is about to be repossessed. We've been living on credit cards and hope. Beverly was shaking her head slowly. Carl, I thought you said business was good. You said you were expanding. I was trying to protect you from the stress. By lying to me, by murdering your mother. I didn't murder anyone. Carl shouted, standing up so fast his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. It was an accident, a malfunction. I was trying to help the family. I had heard enough. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out my phone. Carl Reynolds, you're under arrest. What, Detective Eugene Foster, Dallas Police Department? We've been listening to this entire conversation. The back door of the office opened and 3 police officers walked in, led by a tall black man in a rumpled suit. Detective Foster looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Carl Reynolds, Foster said, pulling out his handcuffs, you're under arrest for the murder of Dorothy Reynolds, conspiracy to commit fraud and computer crimes. You have the right to remain silent. Carl jumped up from his chair. Dad, you can't do this. I'm your son. My son died when he murdered his mother for gambling money. Beverly tried to run, but one of the officers caught her at the front door. She'd been helping Carl access Dorothy's accounts, which made her an accessory to fraud even if she hadn't known about the murder. As they handcuffed Carl, he looked at me with pure hatred. I hope you're happy, Dad. You just destroyed your own family. No, Carl, you destroyed it. I just made sure you faced the consequences. Those people I owe money to, they're going to come after you now. When they find out I can't pay, they'll want compensation from someone. Let them come. They led Carl out in handcuffs while he screamed about lawyers and constitutional rights. Beverly went quietly sobbing into her hands. Detective Foster stayed behind to collect the computers and documents as evidence. Mr. Reynolds, I have to say this was incredibly risky. If your son had been armed, if he'd become violent. Detective, someone killed my wife. Someone hacked her computer, stole her passwords, and then murdered her to cover their tracks. I needed to know who. The digital evidence you collected will be crucial for prosecution, but I have to ask, was any of it obtained illegally? Dorothy's laptop belonged to my wife. As her widower, I inherited it legally. The monitoring software I installed was on my own property. Carl accessed her accounts without authorization, which triggered the surveillance. Foster nodded. The confession we just recorded should be enough for a conviction. Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry you had to learn the truth this way. After everyone left, I sat alone in Carl's pathetic office, surrounded by the evidence of his lies and failures. The man I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball, had murdered his own mother for money he'd gambled away on cryptocurrency. I called George. It's over, I told him. Carl confessed to everything. Jesus. Harold, are you okay? No, but I will be. I drove home through the empty streets of Dallas, past the strip malls and chain restaurants and billboards advertising things nobody really needed. Our house on Maple Street looked the same as always, but everything had changed. Dorothy was gone, Carl was going to prison, and I was alone with the truth that would destroy what was left of our family forever. The house felt different when I walked through the front door that evening. Not just empty, it had felt empty since Dorothy died. This was something else. It felt contaminated, like the walls themselves had absorbed the poison of what Carl had done. I sat in my recliner and tried to process what had just happened. My son had confessed to murdering his mother, not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, not even in a robbery gone wrong. He'd planned it, downloaded malware, hacked her car's computer system, watched the news report of her death, and felt nothing but relief that his plan had worked. Until he realized the software had been too aggressive, even then he hadn't felt remorse. He'd felt inconvenienced. The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. George, Harold, I've been worried about you. How are you doing? I keep thinking about Dorothy's last moments, I said. She was driving to work, probably thinking about her patients, maybe planning what to make for dinner. She pressed the brake pedal and nothing happened. Worse than nothing, the car accelerated instead. Harold, don't do this to yourself. She must have been so confused, so scared. Did she think about Carl in those final seconds? Did she wonder if he was safe? If he'd be okay without her? George was quiet for a moment. You can't torture yourself with what-ifs. She died believing her son loved her. She never knew he'd murdered her for money he'd already gambled away. Maybe that's a mercy. Maybe. Or maybe she deserved to know the truth before she died. I hung up and walked upstairs to our bedroom. Dorothy's side of the bed was exactly as she'd left it Tuesday morning. Her book on the nightstand, a mystery novel she'd never finish. Her reading glasses folded on top of the bookmark, her water glass still half full. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. The next 3 months passed in a blur of legal proceedings, media attention, and family devastation. The story made national news. Son hacks mother's car, kills her for inheritance money. CNN ran a special about cybercrime and automotive security. Dorothy's picture was on the front page of the Dallas Morning News for a week. Carl hired an expensive defense attorney with money he didn't have. The lawyer tried every angle: temporary insanity, diminished capacity, accidental death. But the digital evidence was overwhelming. The monitoring logs showed Carl had accessed Dorothy's car's computer system 17 times in the 2 weeks before her death. He'd practiced overriding the brake systems. He'd researched how to make the malware look like random mechanical failure. This wasn't an accident. It was premeditated murder. Beverly pled guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges in exchange for testifying against Carl. She claimed she'd never known about the murder plot, only the financial fraud. The prosecutor believed her, but the judge sentenced her to 3 years in prison anyway. Carl's trial lasted 2 weeks. I sat in the front row every day, watching my son's defense attorney try to paint him as a victim of gambling addiction and predatory lenders. The lawyer argued that Carl never intended to kill Dorothy, only to scare her into giving him access to her accounts. The prosecutor wasn't buying it. She presented the digital forensics evidence, the monitoring logs, the cryptocurrency trading records showing Carl's massive losses. She showed the jury the malware Carl had downloaded, sophisticated software designed specifically to override automotive safety systems. This wasn't a desperate son making a mistake, she told the jury during closing arguments. This was a calculated killer who murdered his own mother for money he'd already lost to online gambling. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Carl showed no emotion. He just stared straight ahead while the judge scheduled sentencing for the following month. During the sentencing hearing, Carl's lawyer made one final plea for mercy. He talked about Carl's gambling addiction, his financial desperation, his lack of prior criminal history. He asked the judge to consider Carl's youth and potential for rehabilitation. Then it was my turn to speak. I'd written a victim impact statement, but when I stood at the podium, I put the paper aside and spoke from my heart. Your Honor, Carl Reynolds was my son for 32 years. I taught him to ride a bike. I helped him with homework. I paid for his college education. I walked him down the aisle at his wedding. I loved him unconditionally, the way a father loves his child. But the man sitting at that table isn't my son anymore. My son would never have hacked his mother's car. My son would never have murdered the woman who gave him life. My son would never have watched the news report of his mother's death and felt relief that his plan had worked. Dorothy Reynolds was a pediatric nurse who dedicated her life to helping children. She saved lives every day for 23 years. She volunteered at animal shelters. She brought soup to sick neighbors. She loved her family without reservation. Carl stole all of that from the world because he wanted money for cryptocurrency gambling. Not for food, not for shelter, not for medicine. For gambling debts he'd accumulated trying to get rich quick. I don't want revenge, Your Honor, I want justice. And justice means Carl spends the rest of his life in prison, where he can never hurt another family the way he hurt ours. The judge sentenced Carl to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He also ordered Carl to pay $2.8 million in restitution, the exact amount of Dorothy's estate that he'd tried to steal. As they led Carl away in shackles, he looked at me one last time. I expected to see remorse or anger or fear. Instead, I saw nothing. His eyes were empty, like the person I'd known as my son had simply disappeared. After the sentencing, I went to Dorothy's grave. The headstone was simple gray granite with her name, dates, and a line from her favorite psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. I got him, honey, I whispered to the wind. Justice for you, justice for us. But sitting there in the cemetery, I didn't feel satisfaction, I didn't feel closure. I just felt empty. Carl was going to prison forever, but Dorothy was still dead. The money he'd killed her for was still sitting in bank accounts, earning interest on blood, and I was still alone in a house that smelled like her perfume and echoed with 34 years of memories. A week after the sentencing, I discovered Dorothy had left a will I'd never seen. She'd updated it 6 months before her death, apparently sensing that something was wrong with Carl's behavior. The will was precise and devastating. It left Carl exactly $1 with a note explaining that he would receive nothing more should he ever be convicted of a crime against his family. Dorothy had suspected something even if she hadn't known exactly what. The rest of her estate, the $2.8 million in investments, plus a $2 million life insurance policy I'd never known about, went to me. But there was a condition. Dorothy wanted the money used to help other families protect themselves from financial fraud and cybercrime. She'd created a foundation in her will, the Dorothy Reynolds Foundation for Digital Safety. I read Dorothy's will 3 times before the full impact hit me. She'd known. Maybe not the specific details, maybe not the exact method, but she'd sensed that Carl was dangerous. Dangerous enough to write him out of her will. Dangerous enough to leave a paper trail of her suspicions. Dangerous enough to create a foundation specifically designed to prevent other families from suffering what she somehow knew was coming. The foundation documents were detailed and thorough. Dorothy wanted to fund cybersecurity education for seniors, provide free digital forensic services to elderly victims of online fraud, and research automotive security vulnerabilities. She'd even specified that the foundation should work with law enforcement to prosecute digital crimes against vulnerable populations. It was like she'd written a playbook for exposing Carl's crimes 6 months before he committed them. George helped me set up the foundation's legal structure. We found office space in a professional building in Plano, hired a small staff of cybersecurity experts and victim advocates, and began reaching out to law enforcement agencies across Texas. The response was overwhelming. Within 3 months, we'd helped recover $800,000 in stolen assets for 23 families. We'd provided expert testimony in 12 criminal cases. We'd trained over 200 senior citizens in digital security practices. Every case reminded me of Dorothy's death. Every victim we helped was a small victory against the kind of predator who'd killed my wife. But the work couldn't fill the emptiness in my house or the silence at the dinner table. Dorothy's side of the bed remained untouched. Her coffee mug stayed in the cabinet. Her garden died from neglect because I couldn't bear to tend the plants she'd loved. 6 months after Carl's sentencing, I got a call that changed everything. Mr. Reynolds, this is Warden Patricia Martinez from the Huntsville unit. I'm calling about your son. My stomach dropped. What happened? Is he hurt, Mr. Reynolds? Carl was attacked by another inmate yesterday. He's in the prison hospital with serious injuries. How serious? Broken ribs, concussion, internal bleeding. He's stable now, but it was touch and go for a while. I sat down heavily despite everything Carl had done. He was still my son. The thought of him lying broken in a prison hospital bed made me feel sick. Why was he attacked? Word got around about why he was here. Inmates don't take kindly to men who hurt their mothers. Carl's been having a difficult time since he arrived. Is he asking for me? There was a pause. Mr. Reynolds, your son has been asking to see you since the day he got here. This is the first time I've called because this is the first time his injuries were serious enough that I thought, well, that you might want to know. I drove to Huntsville that afternoon, through the flat Texas countryside where heat mirages danced on the asphalt. The prison was exactly what you'd expect. Concrete walls, razor wire, guard towers that looked like they belonged in a war zone. The visitor processing took 2 hours. Metal detectors, background checks, paperwork and triplicate. They led me through a series of locked doors to the hospital ward where Carl was lying in a narrow bed hooked up to monitors and IV tubes. He looked terrible. Both eyes were blackened. His lip was split and he moved like every breath hurt. But when he saw me walk through the door, his face lit up like he was 10 years old again. Dad, you came. I sat in the plastic chair next to his bed. The warden said you were hurt badly. It looks worse than it is. The doctors say I'll be fine in a few weeks. What happened? Carl turned his head toward the window. 3 guys cornered me in the laundry room. They'd heard about Mom, about what I did. One of them had a mother who died in a car accident, too. He didn't appreciate the coincidence. Carl, I'm sorry this happened to you. Are you? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, are you really sorry? Or are you glad that I'm getting what I deserve? I looked at my son, this broken man who'd once been the little boy I'd carried on my shoulders, and tried to find an honest answer. I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm sorry you're scared. I'm sorry your life turned out this way. But you're not sorry I'm here. No, I'm not sorry you're here. You murdered your mother, Carl. This is where you belong. Carl nodded like he'd expected that answer. I think about her every day, Dad. I think about what I did, and I can't understand how I became the kind of person who could do that. The gambling addiction, it wasn't the gambling. The gambling was just an excuse. I was angry, Dad. I'd been angry for years. Angry about what about not having enough money? About watching you and Mom live such small lives when you could have been wealthy. About working at a shitty job while other people my age were getting rich in tech. I stared at him. We lived small lives. You drove the same pickup truck for 15 years. Mom clipped coupons. You bought store-brand groceries. You had money, I know you did, but you lived like you were poor. We were comfortable, Carl. We had everything we needed. You had enough. I wanted more than enough. I wanted what other people had. Nice cars, big houses, expensive clothes. I wanted to feel successful. So you killed your mother. I didn't mean to kill her. Carl's voice rose, then he winced as the movement aggravated his injuries. I just wanted access to her money. If the software had worked like it was supposed to, she would have had some break problems. I would have helped her with her finances, and eventually I could have paid back what I borrowed. Borrowed? Carl, you were stealing. I was going to pay it back. With what your IT business was failing. You were living on credit cards. Carl was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I know what I am, Dad. I know what I did. I don't know how I became this person. I reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time I'd made physical contact with him since before Dorothy's funeral. Carl, I loved you. I loved the boy you were, but that boy died the day you decided your mother's life was worth less than your gambling debts. I know, I can't forgive you. I won't visit you again, but I hope you find some way to live with what you've done. I stood to leave. Carl grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Dad, the people I owed money to, they're still out there. They might come after you. Let them come. I'm serious. These are dangerous people. I'm not afraid of them, Carl. I'm not afraid of anything anymore. I drove home from Huntsville in silence, the Texas countryside blurring past my windows. The visit with Carl had drained something from me that I didn't know I still had. Seeing him broken and beaten in that hospital bed should have made me feel something. Pity, satisfaction, regret. Instead, I felt nothing at all. He was no longer my son. He was just a stranger who happened to share my DNA. But Carl's warning about the cryptocurrency creditors stuck with me. These weren't bank loan officers or credit card companies. These were the kind of people who collected debts with baseball bats and bolt cutters. A week after my prison visit, I found out Carl had been telling the truth. I was working late at the foundation office when George called. His voice was tense, urgent. Harold, where are you right now? At the office. Why? What's wrong? Don't go home tonight. Someone broke into your house. My blood went cold. What do you mean broke in? Your neighbor Mike Rodriguez called me when he couldn't reach you. He saw lights inside your house around 9 p.m., but your truck wasn't in the driveway. When he went to check on things, he found your front door kicked in. Did he call the police? They're there now. Harold, it wasn't a robbery. Nothing was taken, but they left a message. What kind of message? You need to see it for yourself. I met George at my house 45 minutes later. Police cars lined Maple Street, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in emergency colors. Detective Foster was waiting for me on the front porch. Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry about this. Whoever did this wanted to send you a message, not steal anything. We walked through the front door into my living room. The furniture had been overturned, but nothing was broken. Nothing was missing. But spray painted across the wall in red letters were 4 words. Pay Carl's DBS, now. Below that in smaller letters, you have 48 hours. Any idea who might have done this? Foster asked. Carl owes money to some cryptocurrency lenders. Apparently very dangerous ones. How much money? $800,000. Foster whistled low. That's serious money, Mr. Reynolds. I think you should consider staying somewhere else for a few days while we investigate this. I'm not running from these people. They're not making idle threats. Breaking into someone's house to leave a message takes planning and resources. These are professionals. George put a hand on my shoulder. Harold, Foster's right. Come stay with me until this gets sorted out. But I had no intention of hiding from Carl's creditors. If they wanted $800,000, they could come and ask for it like civilized people. If they wanted to threaten me, they'd find out I wasn't as easy a target as they thought. I spent the next day moving Dorothy's inheritance money into offshore accounts and installing a serious security system in my house. Motion sensors, cameras, silent alarms connected directly to the police dispatch. If Carl's creditors wanted to come back, I'd be ready. The Foundation's cybersecurity experts helped me research the cryptocurrency lending operation Carl had borrowed from. It was run by a man named Arthur Cooper, who operated out of a strip club in East Dallas. Cooper was 45 years old with arrests for extortion, assault, and loan sharking. He'd been in and out of prison since his early 20s. Not exactly the kind of person you'd want to owe money to. On Tuesday evening, exactly 48 hours after the break-in, they came for their money. I was sitting in my living room reading when the motion sensors picked up movement in my backyard. 3 men had climbed over the fence and were approaching the house from different angles. The security cameras captured everything in high-definition detail. I called 911 and activated the Foundation's emergency response protocol, a system we'd developed to help victims of financial crimes when they were under immediate threat. Then I waited. The first man tried the back door. When he found it locked, he produced a crowbar and pried it open. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the house. I sat perfectly still in my recliner, my hands folded over my lap. The hidden cameras were recording everything. The police were en route. All I had to do was wait. Harold Reynolds, the voice came from my kitchen, deep, gravelly, with a slight accent I couldn't place. I'm in the living room. 3 men walked into my living room like they owned the place. The leader was tall and muscular, wearing an expensive suit that couldn't hide the bulge of a shoulder holster. His companions looked like they'd stepped out of a mob movie, thick necks, dead eyes, hands that had clearly done violence before. Mr. Reynolds, my name is Arthur Cooper. I believe you know why I'm here. I assume this is about Carl's gambling debts. Your son owes me $80,000 plus interest, plus penalties for late payment. The total is now $2 million. That's Carl's problem, not mine. Cooper sat down on my couch like he'd been invited for tea. Carl is in prison, Mr. Reynolds. He can't pay his debts from a jail cell, but you can. I don't owe you anything. You inherited Carl's debts along with his mother's money. That's how this works. I looked at Cooper and his 2 enforcers. They'd made a critical mistake by coming into my house, threatening me on my own property, while security cameras recorded everything. Mr. Cooper, I've transferred Dorothy's inheritance into accounts you'll never be able to access. Even if I wanted to pay Carl's debts, I couldn't do it from here. Then we'll convince you to access those accounts. One of the enforcers stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. He was young, maybe 25, with prison tattoos covering his forearms. That would be unwise, I said. Why, you're 59 years old and alone. What are you going to do? I smiled. Nothing. I'm going to let the police do it, Cooper frowned. What police? That's when the front door exploded inward and 6 Dallas police officers swarmed into my living room with weapons drawn. Cooper and his men were face down on the floor in handcuffs before they could react. Detective Foster appeared in the doorway. Arthur Cooper, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, extortion, and making terroristic threats. As they led Cooper away, he looked back at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Reynolds. Yes, it is. The next day, I received a call from the FBI. Apparently, Cooper's cryptocurrency lending operation had been under federal investigation for months. The evidence my security cameras had captured, combined with the Foundation's research into Cooper's criminal network, provided exactly what the FBI needed to build a racketeering case. Cooper was charged with running an illegal gambling operation, extortion, money laundering, and a dozen other federal crimes. He pled guilty to avoid a life sentence and was sent to federal prison for 25 years. His entire organization collapsed within a week. With Cooper's criminal organization dismantled, I thought the nightmare was finally over. Carl was in prison, the people he owed money to were locked up, and I could focus on building Dorothy's foundation into something that would honor her memory. But 3 months later, I learned that justice isn't always clean or final. I was at the foundation office reviewing grant applications when my assistant knocked on my door. Mr. Reynolds, there's a woman here to see you. She says it's about your son. The woman was in her 40s, well-dressed but tired-looking. She introduced herself as Linda Martinez, and she was Carl's new lawyer. Mr. Reynolds, I'm handling Carl's appeal. I wanted to discuss some new information that's come to light. What kind of new information? Evidence that Carl may not have acted alone. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean? Martinez opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. During our investigation, we discovered that the malware Carl used to hack your wife's car was created by someone else. Someone with significantly more technical expertise than Carl possessed. Who, we believe it was Beverly. I stared at her. Beverly had pled guilty to fraud charges and was serving 3 years in prison, but murder, that's impossible. Beverly didn't know anything about computers. That's what she wanted everyone to believe, but Beverly Reynolds has a computer science degree from Texas A&M. She worked as a software developer for 5 years before she married your son. The room started spinning. That can't be right. Carl told us Beverly was a nurse. Carl lied. Beverly was never a nurse. She was a programmer who specialized in embedded system software, the kind of software that controls automotive computers. Martinez laid out documents showing Beverly's real educational background and work history. She'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and had worked for 3 different tech companies developing software for automotive manufacturers. Mr. Reynolds, we believe Beverly wrote the malware that killed your wife. Carl was just the delivery system. Why would Beverly want Dorothy dead? Money. Beverly knew about your wife's investment accounts long before Carl did. She'd been planning this for months, possibly years. Carl's gambling debts just gave her the perfect cover story. I thought back to Beverly's behavior at the funeral, her yellow legal pad, her questions about financial accounts, her eagerness to help access Dorothy's passwords. She hadn't been supporting Carl's scheme. She'd been running it. What evidence do you have? Martinez pulled out more documents. Financial records showing Beverly accessed dark web forums where the malware was purchased. Email communications between Beverly and known hackers. Bank records showing Beverly made cryptocurrency payments to criminal organizations. And Carl? Carl was the fall guy. Beverly convinced him he was saving the family from his gambling debts, but she was actually executing a murder plot she'd been planning since the day she learned about Dorothy's investments. I felt sick. Carl was guilty of many things, gambling away hundreds of thousands of dollars, lying to his family, being willing to steal from his mother. But murder? That might have been Beverly's idea from the beginning. What does this mean for Carl's case? It means he might not be guilty of premeditated murder. Conspiracy, yes. Fraud, yes. But if Beverly planned and executed the actual killing, Carl could be looking at manslaughter charges instead of life in prison. I sat back in my chair, processing this new information. Ms. Martinez, even if what you're saying is true, Carl still participated in a scheme that resulted in his mother's death. I understand your feelings, Mr. Reynolds, but Carl was manipulated by someone much more sophisticated than he was. Beverly used his gambling addiction and desperation to turn him into her weapon. What do you want from me? I want you to consider supporting Carl's appeal. Your testimony about Beverly's deception could be crucial. I thought about my last visit with Carl in the prison hospital, his confusion about how he'd become capable of murder, his genuine bewilderment at his own actions. If Beverly had been manipulating him all along, it would explain a lot, but it wouldn't bring Dorothy back. Ms. Martinez, I'll review your evidence. But I make no promises about supporting the appeal. After she left, I called Detective Foster and arranged to meet the next day. Foster reviewed Martinez's evidence with the kind of thoroughness I'd come to expect from him. This is compelling, he admitted. Beverly definitely had the technical skills to create that malware. And the financial evidence shows she was making payments to criminal hackers months before Carl's gambling debts reached crisis level. So Carl might be innocent of murder? Innocent is a strong word. Carl knew he was participating in a scheme to frighten his mother and steal her money. But you're right, he might not have known Beverly was planning to kill her. What happens now? We reopen the investigation. Interview Beverly again. Review all the digital evidence with this new information in mind. If Beverly really was the mastermind, she could be looking at additional charges. The reinvestigation took 6 months. Beverly initially maintained her innocence, claiming she'd only helped Carl access financial accounts after Dorothy's accidental death. But when prosecutors presented evidence of her communications with hackers and her payments for automotive malware, she broke down and confessed. Beverly had been planning Dorothy's murder for over a year. She'd researched Dorothy's investment accounts, learned about the inheritance structure, and developed a plan to eliminate Dorothy while framing the death as a tragic accident. Carl's gambling debts had provided the perfect cover story. She'd manipulated Carl's desperation, convincing him that scaring Dorothy with car troubles would force her to give them access to her accounts. But Beverly had programmed the malware to kill, not just frighten. Carl had been a pawn in Beverly's murder plot. The district attorney offered Carl a new plea deal. In exchange for testifying against Beverly, he could plead guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges with a sentence of 15 years instead of life in prison. Carl accepted the deal. Beverly was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. I attended both sentencing hearings. When Carl was sentenced, I spoke to him afterward. "I'm sorry I didn't see what Beverly was doing to you." I told him, "Dad, I'm still responsible for what happened. I chose to participate in the scheme. I chose to lie to you and Mom. I chose to put gambling ahead of family, but you didn't choose to murder her." Carl was crying now. "I miss her so much, Dad. Every day in prison I think about her, about the conversations we'll never have, about the grandchildren she'll never meet, about how disappointed she'd be in the man I became. She'd be disappointed in your choices, Carl, but she'd still love you. Do you still love me?" I looked at my son, older now, grayer, scarred by prison violence and the weight of his mistakes. "Yes, I still love you, but I can't forget what happened. And I can't pretend the last few years didn't happen. I understand. When you get out in 15 years, you'll be 47 years old. You'll have a chance to build a new life. Don't waste it." The Dorothy Reynolds Foundation grew rapidly in the years following Beverly's conviction. What started as a way to honor my wife's memory became a nationally recognized organization fighting cybercrime against elderly Americans. We expanded from our small office in Plano to a full facility in downtown Dallas, with satellite offices in Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. George Thompson became the foundation's chief operating officer, handling the day-to-day operations while I focused on developing new programs and partnerships. We worked with the FBI, state attorney general's offices, and local police departments to train investigators in digital forensics. We provided free cybersecurity consultations to seniors who'd been targeted by online scams. We funded research into automotive security and smart home vulnerabilities. Every case reminded me why Dorothy had to die. Every victim we helped was a small victory against the kind of predators who prey on vulnerable people. But the foundation's success couldn't fill the emptiness in my house or the silence at the dinner table. 5 years after Dorothy's death, I was still living like a ghost in our old life. That changed when I met Carmen Torres. Carmen was Dorothy's sister, the one who'd flown in from Phoenix for the funeral. She'd kept in touch over the years, calling on holidays and Dorothy's birthday to check on me. Carmen was 54 years old, a high school Spanish teacher who'd never married. She was smart, funny, and reminded me enough of Dorothy to make me feel comfortable, but different enough to make me feel like I wasn't betraying my wife's memory. Carmen started visiting Dallas more often, ostensibly to help with foundation events, but really to keep an old widower from disappearing entirely into his work. She cooked meals in my kitchen, tended Dorothy's abandoned garden, and gradually brought life back to a house that had become a mausoleum. "You know, Dorothy would want you to be happy," Carmen told me one evening as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset. "She wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone." "I'm not ready for that conversation yet. When will you be ready?" "I don't know. Maybe never." Carmen nodded. "I understand. But Harold, you're only 64 years old. You could have 20 good years ahead of you. Don't waste them living in the past." That conversation happened on a Thursday. On Friday morning, I received a letter that changed everything. The return address was familiar. Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Carl's handwriting on the envelope. "Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know I'm being released next month. I've served 8 years of my 15-year sentence, and I'm being released for good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs. I don't expect you to welcome me back with open arms. I know I destroyed our family and caused you pain that can never be healed. But I wanted you to know that I've spent every day of the last 8 years thinking about what I did and trying to become a better person. I've completed my GED, earned an associate's degree in business, and participated in addiction counseling programs. I've also been working with a victims' rights organization, speaking to other inmates about the consequences of financial crimes. I know I can never undo what happened to Mom, but I want you to know that I'm not the same person who participated in Beverly's scheme 8 years ago. I'm being released to a halfway house in Austin. I don't expect anything from you, but if you're willing, I'd like the chance to apologize in person for what I put you and Mom through. I love you, Dad. I know I lost the right to say that, but it's still true. Your son, Carl, I read the letter 3 times before calling George. Carl's getting out of prison next month. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Angry, scared, relieved, all of it at once. Are you going to see him? I don't know that either. George was quiet for a moment. Harold, you've spent 8 years building something positive out of Dorothy's death. You've helped hundreds of families. You've turned tragedy into purpose. Maybe it's time to think about forgiveness. I'm not sure I'm capable of forgiving him. I'm not talking about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. I'm talking about letting go of the anger so it doesn't poison whatever time you have left. That night, I sat in Dorothy's garden, now Carmen's garden, and thought about forgiveness. About second chances, about the difference between justice and revenge. Carl had served 8 years in prison. Beverly would die behind bars. Cooper and his criminal organization were destroyed. Justice had been served as much as justice could be served for a crime that couldn't be undone, but what came after justice? I called the halfway house in Austin and left a message for Carl. 2 days later, he called back. Dad, I wasn't sure you'd actually contact me. I wasn't sure either. Carl, I read your letter. I'm glad you've been working on yourself. It's been hard. Prison is. It's not a place anyone should have to learn how to be human. But the counseling programs helped. Understanding addiction. Understanding how Beverly manipulated my desperation. Are you still angry with her every day? But I'm angrier with myself for being weak enough to let her use me. Carl, what happened to your mother wasn't your fault. Beverly planned that murder long before your gambling debts became critical. You were manipulated by someone who was smarter and more ruthless than you realized. Carl was crying now. I could hear it in his voice. Dad, I know you're trying to make me feel better, but I made choices. I chose to gamble. I chose to lie to you and Mom. I chose to participate in a scheme I knew was wrong. But you didn't choose to murder her. No, but I chose to put her at risk. And that's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. We talked for an hour about prison, about the foundation, about Carmen, about Dorothy's garden. It was the longest conversation Carl and I had shared since before Dorothy's death. Dad, would it be okay if I visited sometime? I understand if you're not ready for that, but I'd like to see Dorothy's grave. I'd like to tell her I'm sorry. I looked out at the garden where Dorothy's roses were blooming again under Carmen's care, where life was slowly returning to a space that had been barren with grief. Yes, Carl, you can visit. 3 weeks later, Carl walked out of prison a free man. He was 40 years old, grayer than he should have been, with lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years and harder lessons. But when he smiled, I could see the little boy who used to help me change the oil in my truck. We met at a restaurant halfway between Dallas and Austin. Neutral ground for a conversation that might go badly. Carl looked healthier than I'd expected. Prison had been hard on him physically. He was thinner, more cautious, with the hyper-vigilant awareness of someone who'd learned to watch for danger. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Humility, maybe, or wisdom earned through suffering. Thank you for agreeing to see me, Dad. Thank you for becoming someone worth seeing. We talked for 3 hours that first day. Carl told me about his years in prison, the violence, the isolation, the slow process of understanding what addiction had done to his judgment. He'd completed substance abuse counseling, anger management, and financial responsibility courses. He'd earned his associate's degree with a 3.8 GPA and had been accepted to finish his bachelor's degree at the University of Texas. What do you want to do with your life now? I asked. I want to help other people avoid the mistakes I made. I've been working with a nonprofit that helps ex-convicts reintegrate into society. Financial literacy, addiction counseling, job training. I know what it's like to hit bottom, Dad. Maybe I can help others climb back up. That sounds like something your mother would have approved of. Carl's eyes filled with tears. Do you really think so? Dorothy believed in second chances. She believed people could change if they were willing to do the work. We drove to the cemetery together that afternoon. Carl hadn't seen Dorothy's grave since the burial 8 years earlier. The simple granite headstone was weathered now, surrounded by the small garden. Carmen had planted yellow roses, Dorothy's favorite. Carl knelt beside the grave and spoke to Dorothy in Spanish, words of apology and regret that he'd learned in prison from Hispanic inmates who'd become his friends. He told her about the education he'd completed, the counseling he'd participated in, the work he hoped to do helping other families avoid the devastation he'd caused. Then he placed a single yellow rose on her headstone. I know I can never undo what I helped Beverly do to you, he said softly. But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. We drove back to my house in relative silence. Carl looked around the neighborhood where he'd grown up, noting the changes, new houses, mature trees, neighbors he'd known as a child who were now elderly. The house looks good, Dad. Different, but good. Carmen had indeed made changes. Dorothy's garden was thriving. The kitchen had been repainted. There were photographs on the mantle that included images from foundation events. pictures of Dorothy with her nursing colleagues, and a few photos of Carmen and me at various functions. Carmen seems to make you happy, Carl observed. She does, but it's not the same as what I had with your mother. It shouldn't be the same. Mom's gone. But Dad, you deserve to have someone in your life who cares about you. That evening, Carl met Carmen for the first time since the funeral. I'd been nervous about the introduction. Would Carl resent Carmen for taking Dorothy's place? Would Carmen be comfortable around the man whose actions had killed her sister? Instead, they talked for hours about Dorothy, about family, about the foundation's work. Carmen had been following Carl's rehabilitation through letters and phone calls with the prison chaplain. She'd been praying for his recovery and redemption. I don't forgive you for what happened to Dorothy, Carmen told Carl honestly, but I believe people can change, and I believe you've done the work to change. Thank you for taking care of my father, Carl replied. He needed someone to remind him how to live. Over the following months, Carl and I rebuilt our relationship slowly and carefully. He visited every few weeks, always respectful of my time and Carmen's presence in the house. He helped with foundation events when his work schedule allowed. He spoke at conferences about cryptocurrency fraud and the warning signs of gambling addiction. Carl was working at a residential treatment center for addiction recovery, helping newly sober individuals develop financial literacy and life skills. The pay was modest, but the work gave him purpose and satisfaction that his failed IT business never had. I make $35,000 a year, he told me during one visit. Beverly and I used to spend more than that on restaurants and clothes, but I've never been happier with my life. Money doesn't buy happiness, Carl. Your mother tried to teach you that. I wish I'd listened to her when I had the chance. 2 years after Carl's release, I received a call that brought everything full circle. Detective Foster was on the line, and his voice was grave. Mr. Reynolds, I need to tell you something about Beverly. She died in prison last night. What happened? Suicide. She left a note. I think you should see it. Foster met me at the police station an hour later. Beverly's suicide note was brief but devastating. To Harold Reynolds, I know you'll never forgive me for what I did to Dorothy. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know that Carl was innocent of the murder itself. I manipulated him into participating in what he thought was a financial fraud scheme. He never knew I was planning to kill Dorothy. I wrote the malware that overrode her car's safety systems. I programmed it to kill, not just frighten. Carl believed we were only going to scare her into giving us access to her accounts. I used Carl's gambling addiction and desperation to turn him into my weapon. He was weak and stupid and greedy, but he wasn't a murderer. I was the murderer. I've spent 10 years in prison thinking about what I did. I killed a good woman who never hurt anyone. I destroyed a family. I sent an innocent man to prison for my crimes. I can't live with the guilt anymore. Please tell Carl I'm sorry for what I did to his life and his family. The note was signed and dated the day before Beverly's death. I drove to Austin that afternoon to tell Carl in person. I found him at the treatment center, leading a group therapy session for men recovering from gambling addiction. Through the window, I watched him facilitate a discussion about financial responsibility and family relationships. His patience with the struggling men, his gentle encouragement of their progress, reminded me of Dorothy's work with sick children. Carl had found his calling in helping others recover from the same addiction that had destroyed his life. After the session, we sat in his small office, a cramped space, with motivational posters and thank you letters from former clients. Carl, I have something to tell you about Beverly. I handed him the suicide note and watched his face as he read it. When he finished, he was crying. She's still trying to save me, even from the grave, he said. What do you mean, Dad? I knew what we were doing was wrong. Maybe I didn't know Beverly was planning murder, but I knew we were going to hurt Mom. I chose to participate in a scheme that put her at risk. Beverly's confession doesn't change that. It changes how I see what happened. How? Carl, you made terrible choices. But you were manipulated by someone who was smarter and more ruthless than you realized. That doesn't excuse your actions, but it explains them. Carl folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. I'll always carry responsibility for what happened to Mom, but maybe now I can also carry hope that I've learned from it. 3 years after Beverly's death, the Dorothy Reynolds Foundation had become one of the most respected cybersecurity advocacy organizations in the country. We'd helped over 2,000 families recover stolen assets, provided expert testimony in 150 criminal cases, and trained thousands of seniors in digital security practices. But our most successful program was something we called the Second Chances Initiative, a partnership with state prisons to provide cybersecurity education to inmates preparing for release. The idea was to teach former criminals how to protect themselves and their families from the same digital predators who had often contributed to their downfall. Carl had become the program's most effective instructor. "I know what it's like to lose everything to online gambling," he told a group of inmates at the Huntsville unit. "I know what it's like to be so desperate for money that you'll hurt the people you love. But I also know that you can rebuild your life if you're willing to do the work." The program had a 78% success rate, meaning 78% of participants found stable employment within 6 months of release and had no subsequent arrests. It was revolutionary work that was being studied by criminal justice experts across the country. Carl had also met someone. Her name was Maria Santos, and she was a social worker at the treatment center where Carl worked. Maria was 35 years old, divorced with a 10-year-old daughter named Sophia. She was smart, compassionate, and completely aware of Carl's history. "She knows everything, Dad," Carl told me during one of his visits, about Mom, about Beverly, about the gambling. "She knows what kind of person I used to be, and she's okay with that. She says she's more interested in who I am now than who I used to be." Carl brought Maria and Sophia to meet me and Carmen on a Sunday afternoon in spring. Sophia was shy at first, but she warmed up quickly when she discovered that Carmen spoke Spanish and could help her with her homework. Maria was exactly what I'd hoped for Carl, someone who saw past his mistakes to the man he'd become. She was strong enough to challenge him when he fell into old patterns of thinking, but gentle enough to support him through the difficult work of rebuilding his life. "Mr. Reynolds," she told me as we sat on the back porch watching Sophia play in Dorothy's garden, "Carl talks about his mother every day, about what she would think of the work he's doing, whether she would be proud of the man he's become. What do you tell him?" "I tell him that any mother would be proud of a son who dedicates his life to helping others avoid the mistakes he made." That evening, as Carl was preparing to drive back to Austin, he pulled me aside. "Dad, I want to ask Maria to marry me." "How long have you known her?" 18 months. "But Dad, I know she's the person I want to spend my life with. She makes me want to be a better man every day." "Then ask her. I want to do it right this time." "I want your blessing." I looked at my son, this 43-year-old man who had survived prison, addiction, and the weight of his terrible mistakes to become someone Dorothy would have been proud of. "You have my blessing, Carl, but more importantly, you have my respect." Carl and Maria were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at our house. Carmen and I hosted the reception in Dorothy's garden, surrounded by yellow roses and the friends Carl had made through his work at the foundation and treatment center. During his wedding toast, Carl spoke about second chances and redemption. 10 years ago, I was a very different person. I was selfish, addicted, and willing to hurt my family for money. My actions contributed to my mother's death and destroyed my father's trust in me. I spent 8 years in prison thinking I would never be worthy of love or forgiveness. But the people in this room, my father, Carmen, Maria, Sophia, and all of you have shown me that redemption is possible if you're willing to work for it. Maria, you've taught me what it means to love someone more than yourself. Sophia, you've shown me what it means to be responsible for another person's well-being. Dad, you've shown me what forgiveness looks like. I can never undo the pain I caused, but with your help, I can make sure my mother's death wasn't meaningless. Every person we help through the foundation, every family we protect from cybercrime, every former addict who finds recovery, that's Dorothy's legacy living on. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. 2 years later, Carl and Maria had a son. They named him Harold after me and gave him the middle name David after Dorothy. Little Harry was a bright, curious child who reminded me of Carl at that age, before addiction and desperation had twisted his judgment. Watching Carl be a father was perhaps the most healing experience of my entire journey. He was patient, attentive, and completely devoted to his son's well-being. He read bedtime stories, helped with homework, and taught Harry how to ride a bike in the same driveway where I'd taught Carl decades earlier. I think about Mom every time I look at Harry. Carl told me one afternoon as we watched the boy play in the backyard about what she would have said to him, the stories she would have told him. "She would have spoiled him rotten," I said. "She would have taught him right from wrong. She would have made sure he understood the difference between wants and needs. You're teaching him those things too. I'm trying. But Dad, sometimes I worry that I'm too damaged to raise a good kid." "Carl, you're not the same person who participated in Beverly's scheme. You've done the work to change. You've proven that every day for the past 7 years. How can you be so sure? Because Dorothy would have loved the man you've become. She would have been proud of the father you are and the work you're doing, and she would have adored her grandson." Carl was quiet for a moment, watching Harry chase butterflies among Carmen's flowers. "Do you think she knows, somehow? I think love doesn't die, Carl. It just changes form. Dorothy's love for you doesn't exist in her physical presence anymore, but it exists in your commitment to helping other families avoid the pain we went through. It exists in the way you treat Maria and Sophia and Harry. It exists in the Foundation's work protecting vulnerable people from the kind of predators who destroyed our family. So she's still here, in a way. She's still here. In the best parts of who you've become. That evening, as Carl was loading his family into their car for the drive back to Austin, Harry ran up to me with a small drawing he'd made. "Grandpa Harold, this is for you." The drawing showed stick figures in a garden, a man and woman, labeled Grandpa and Grandma Carmen. Another man and woman with a little girl, labeled Daddy and Mommy and Sophia, and a small boy with a big smile, labeled me. But in the corner of the paper, drawn in yellow crayon, was an angel with a nurse's hat. "That's Grandma Dorothy," Harry explained. "Daddy says she watches over our family from heaven." I hung Harry's drawing on my refrigerator right next to a photo of Dorothy in her nursing uniform. Two images, separated by death and decades, but connected by love that had survived the worst kind of betrayal and found a way to heal. 10 years had passed since Dorothy's death when I received the phone call that would bring everything full circle. I was 69 years old, officially retired from active management of the Foundation, but still serving on its board of directors. Carmen and I had been married for 3 years, minus a quiet ceremony with just family and close friends. Carl had walked me down the aisle, the role reversal not lost on either of us. The call came from Detective Foster, who had remained a friend and occasional consultant to the Foundation even after his retirement from the Dallas Police Department. "Harold, I need to tell you about something. We've arrested a man for running a cryptocurrency fraud scheme. His name is Marcus Webb, and he's been targeting elderly victims with the same kind of malware Beverly used to hack Dorothy's car." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Webb has been using automotive hacking to murder wealthy seniors and make their deaths look like accidents. He then uses their financial information to steal their assets. We think he's killed at least 6 people over the past 2 years. How did you catch him?" "Your Foundation's database." When we started investigating Webb's victims, we found patterns that matched the warning signs you've been teaching people to recognize. Digital security breaches before the deaths, unusual financial account activity, family members asking about inheritances immediately after the funerals. I sat down heavily. Dorothy wasn't Beverly's first victim. We don't think so. Based on what we're learning about Webb's operation, we believe Beverly may have been part of a larger network of people using automotive hacking to commit murder for financial gain. Is Webb connected to Beverly? We're still investigating, but there are similarities in their methods that suggest they may have learned from the same source. "Harold, I need to ask you something. Would you be willing to testify at Webb's trial about Dorothy's case? Your expertise in cybersecurity and your experience with automotive hacking could be crucial to the prosecution." I agreed to testify, but first I wanted to understand exactly what Webb had done and how it connected to Dorothy's murder. Foster arranged for me to review the case files and meet with the FBI agents who'd been tracking Webb's network. What I learned made me sick. Webb had been operating for at least 5 years, targeting wealthy seniors in Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. His method was identical to what Beverly had done to Dorothy: hack into the victims' financial accounts to assess their net worth, then use automotive malware to cause fatal car accidents. After the victim's death, Webb would use stolen credentials to transfer money from their accounts before family members even knew the accounts existed. He'd murdered 11 people and stolen over $15 million. But the most disturbing discovery was that Webb wasn't working alone. He was part of a criminal organization that specialized in inheritance acceleration, murdering wealthy elderly people to steal their assets before natural death occurred. The organization provided technology, training, and financial backing to people like Beverly and Webb. In return, they took a percentage of the stolen money. Beverly had been a contractor, not a mastermind. I called Carl immediately. "Dad, what's wrong? You sound terrible." "Carl, I need to tell you something about Beverly and what happened to your mother." I explained what Foster had discovered about Webb and the Inheritance Acceleration Network. How Beverly had likely been trained by the same organization that was now teaching other killers to murder elderly people for their money. Carl was quiet for a long time after I finished. "So Mom wasn't Beverly's only victim," he finally said. "No, and if we hadn't caught Beverly, she probably would have killed again. Dad, this changes everything. I've been carrying guilt about Mom's death for 12 years. But if Beverly was part of a criminal organization that was already murdering people, Carl, your gambling debts created the opportunity Beverly needed. Your participation in the financial fraud gave her cover for the murder. You're still responsible for your choices. I know. But Dad, this means Mom's death wasn't just about my mistakes. She died because there are people in the world who kill elderly Americans for money, and Beverly was one of them. What does that mean to you? It means I need to do more than just help individual addicts recover. I need to help stop the people who prey on vulnerable families. The next week, Carl drove to Dallas to meet with the FBI agents investigating Webb's network. He volunteered to work undercover to help identify other members of the Inheritance Acceleration Organization. Mr. Reynolds, Agent Sarah Mitchell explained, "Your son's experience with Beverly could be invaluable. He understands how these organizations recruit and manipulate desperate people. Isn't that dangerous? We'll take every precaution to protect his identity. But Carl could help us save lives by identifying other potential victims and perpetrators." Carl looked at me across the conference table. "Dad, I need to do this. For Mom, for all the other families who might be targeted. What about Maria and the kids? They understand. Maria says it's what Dorothy would want me to do." Over the next 6 months, Carl worked with the FBI to infiltrate online communities where inheritance acceleration schemes were discussed. Using his genuine history of financial desperation and criminal conviction, he was able to gain the trust of people who were considering similar crimes. The operation was called Golden Years, and it was the most successful cybercrime investigation in FBI history. Working with Carl's intelligence, agents arrested 23 people in 12 states who were involved in inheritance acceleration schemes. They prevented 7 murders that were already in the planning stages and recovered over $30 million in stolen assets. Marcus Webb was convicted of 11 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. During his trial, I testified about Dorothy's death and the pattern of automotive hacking that Webb had used to kill his victims. Mr. Reynolds, the prosecutor, asked me during my testimony, "What would you want the jury to understand about crimes like this?" "I'd want them to understand that the victims aren't just numbers in a database." Dorothy Reynolds was a pediatric nurse who dedicated her life to helping sick children. She volunteered at animal shelters, she brought soup to neighbors when they were ill, she loved her family unconditionally. Marcus Webb didn't just steal her money. He stole all the good she could have done in the world if she'd lived to natural old age. He stole the time she could have spent with her grandson. He stole the contributions she could have made to her community. When you murder someone for their inheritance, you're not just taking their life. You're taking all the love they could have given, all the help they could have provided, all the joy they could have shared. You're stealing from everyone who would have benefited from their continued existence. The jury convicted Webb on all counts after deliberating for less than 2 hours. After the trial, Carl and I visited Dorothy's grave together. The cemetery was quiet. With autumn leaves beginning to fall on the headstone, Carmen had decorated with fresh yellow roses. "Mom, we got them," Carl said softly. Webb, Beverly, all of them. We stopped other families from going through what we went through. I placed my hand on Carl's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of the work you did to help the FBI. I couldn't save her, but maybe we saved someone else's mother. Maybe we saved a lot of someone else's mothers." We stood in silence for several minutes, remembering Dorothy and thinking about the long journey from her death to justice for not just our family, but for all the families who had been targeted by the Inheritance Acceleration Network. The Dorothy Reynolds Foundation celebrated its 15th anniversary with a gala at the Dallas Museum of Art. Over 500 people attended: law enforcement officers, cybersecurity experts, families we'd helped over the years, and politicians who'd supported legislation to strengthen penalties for digital crimes against seniors. I was 74 years old now, officially retired, but still passionate about the Foundation's mission. Carmen had become the Foundation's chief advocacy officer, using her background in education to develop programs that taught digital literacy to vulnerable populations. Carl served on our board of directors and continued to run the Second Chances Initiative, which had expanded to prisons in 12 states. During my speech that evening, I talked about how Dorothy's death had been transformed from a personal tragedy into a force for protecting other families. 15 years ago, my wife Dorothy was murdered by people who saw elderly Americans as nothing more than ATM machines. They hacked her car's computer system and caused a fatal accident to steal her inheritance. But Dorothy's death wasn't meaningless. In the 15 years since her murder, this foundation has helped over 10,000 families protect themselves from cybercrime. We've recovered $150 million in stolen assets. We've provided expert testimony that put 400 digital predators in prison. We've trained 50,000 seniors in cybersecurity practices. Most importantly, we've prevented crimes. Every family that learns to protect their digital accounts, every senior who recognizes the warning signs of online fraud, every law enforcement officer who understands automotive hacking, they're all part of Dorothy's legacy. My wife died because criminals thought elderly Americans were easy targets. We've spent 15 years proving them wrong. The audience gave me a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. But the most meaningful moment of the evening came afterward when a young woman approached me near the silent auction tables. "Mr. Reynolds?" "My name is Jennifer Patterson. My grandmother was one of Marcus Webb's victims. I recognize the name from the FBI case files. Eleanor Patterson, 78 years old, murdered in Oklahoma City 2 months before Webb was caught. I'm so sorry for your loss, Jennifer. Mr. Reynolds, I wanted to thank you and your son for the work you did to catch Webb. Grandmother Eleanor raised me after my parents died. She was everything to me." "Tell me about her." "She was a retired teacher who volunteered at the literacy center. She had this amazing garden where she grew vegetables for the food bank. She was planning to take me to Europe for my college graduation. We'd been saving for that trip for 3 years. Jennifer was crying now. Webb stole $230 million from her accounts after he killed her. But worse than that, he stole all the time we should have had together. All the conversations we'll never have, all the grandchildren she'll never meet. I thought about Harry, now 8 years old, and his little sister Emma, who was 3. They would never know their great-grandmother Dorothy except through stories and photographs. Webb's victims had their own families who would carry similar holes forever. Jennifer, what are you doing now? I'm finishing law school. I want to specialize in cybercrime prosecution. I want to put people like Webb in prison for the rest of their lives. Have you considered working with our foundation? We partner with prosecutors across the country to provide expert testimony and technical analysis. I was hoping you'd ask. 6 months later, Jennifer Patterson joined the foundation as our first full-time legal counsel. She was brilliant, passionate, and brought the kind of personal understanding of cybercrime victimization that made her incredibly effective with juries and judges. But the most significant development that year wasn't professional, it was personal. Carl called me on a Tuesday evening in March with news that would change everything. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Maria and I are getting divorced." My heart sank. "Carl? What happened? I thought you two were happy." "We were happy. We are happy. That's not the problem. Then what is the problem?" "Dad, Maria has been offered a job with Doctors Without Borders, medical mission work in Central America. It's her dream job, something she's wanted to do since before we met, and you can't go with her. The Second Chances initiative is at a critical point. We're expanding into federal prisons, and I'm the only person who can manage that transition. If I leave now, the program could collapse. So you're choosing work over marriage. Dad, it's more complicated than that. Maria and I talked about this for months. We love each other, but we both have callings that are pulling us in different directions. We've decided to separate so she can pursue her mission work, and I can continue the prison programs. What about the kids? Sophia is 18 now, starting college in the fall. She'll spend summers with Maria and the school year with me. Harry and Emma will live with me primarily, but they'll visit Maria during school breaks. I was quiet for a long time, processing what Carl was telling me. "Are you sure about this?" "Dad, I spent 8 years in prison learning that life is short and unpredictable. Maria has a chance to save lives in some of the poorest places on earth. I have a chance to help prevent other families from going through what we went through. We're both following the paths Dorothy would have wanted us to follow. But you'll be a single father. I'll have help. Maria's mother lives in Austin and has offered to help with the kids. And Dad, I was hoping, would you and Carmen consider moving closer? The kids love spending time with you, and I could use the family support." Carmen and I had been talking about selling the house on Maple Street and moving somewhere smaller. The neighborhood had changed, and the house held too many memories, both painful and joyful, for us to be completely comfortable there. Let me talk to Carmen. But Carl, yes, I think we'd like to be closer to the grandchildren. 3 months later, Carmen and I bought a small house in Austin, 15 minutes from Carl's neighborhood. We kept an apartment in Dallas for foundation business, but Austin became our primary residence. The transition was easier than I'd expected. Carmen loved helping with Harry and Emma, and I enjoyed being a hands-on grandfather in ways I'd never been able to when Carl was young and I was working 60-hour weeks. Harry was now 8 years old, a serious boy who loved books and asking complicated questions about how things worked. Emma was 3, a whirlwind of energy who reminded everyone of Dorothy's spirit and determination. Grandpa Harold. Harry said one afternoon as we worked together in Carmen's garden, "Why did my daddy go to prison?" Carl had been honest with Harry about his past, but in age-appropriate ways. Harry knew his father had made serious mistakes and had to face consequences, but he didn't know the details about Dorothy's death or the circumstances surrounding it. "Your daddy made some very bad choices when he was younger," I told Harry. "He did things that hurt people, including your grandmother, Dorothy. Prison was the consequence for those choices. But he's a good person now. He's always been a good person, Harry. But good people sometimes make terrible mistakes. Your daddy spent 8 years learning from his mistakes and figuring out how to be a better man. Will I make terrible mistakes too?" I looked at this serious little boy who was trying to understand the complexities of adult life and family history. "Harry, everyone makes mistakes, but most people don't make mistakes as serious as your daddy made, and you have something your daddy didn't have when he was young." "What?" "You have a father who understands the difference between right and wrong because he learned it the hard way. Your daddy will teach you things my generation didn't know how to teach." That conversation with Harry stayed with me for weeks. The boy was trying to understand how good people could do terrible things, and whether those tendencies might be hereditary. It was a conversation I'd never had to have with Carl when he was young, because I'd never imagined my son would grow up to be capable of the things he'd done. But Harry was growing up with full knowledge of his father's past, the mistakes, the consequences, and the redemption. In some ways, that honesty was a gift. Harry would never have to discover later in life that his father wasn't the man he thought he was. That summer, Carl received news that would test everything we'd rebuilt as a family. "Dad, I got a call from the parole board," Carl told me during one of our weekly dinners. "Beverly's parents want to meet with me." I nearly choked on my iced tea. Beverly's parents, why? They want to understand what happened. They want to hear my side of the story about how Beverly died. Beverly's parents, Robert and Linda Williams, lived in Oklahoma City. They were in their 70s now and had lost their only child to suicide in prison. According to Carl, they'd been following the news about the Inheritance Acceleration Network and Marcus Webb's trial. They'd learned that their daughter had been part of a larger criminal organization. They want closure, Carl explained. They want to understand how their daughter became a murderer. "Carl, you don't owe them anything." "Dad, they lost their child too. Maybe not the way we lost Mom, but they lost Beverly just as completely. If talking to me helps them understand what happened, shouldn't I do it?" Carmen, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, spoke up. "Carl, what do you hope to gain from this meeting?" "I don't know if I'll gain anything, but maybe I can help them understand that Beverly wasn't born a killer. She was recruited by people who trained her to murder elderly victims. Maybe that knowledge will help them grieve, or maybe it will make their grief worse." Carl was quiet for a moment. "Carmen, I've spent 15 years learning to live with the consequences of my choices. Maybe it's time to help other people learn to live with the consequences of Beverly's choices." The meeting was arranged for a Saturday afternoon at a hotel conference room in Dallas, neutral territory for everyone involved. Carl asked me to come with him for moral support, and I agreed. Robert and Linda Williams were exactly what I'd expected: elderly, well-dressed, carrying themselves with the dignity of people who'd been successful in life but had been devastated by circumstances beyond their control. Robert was a retired accountant, Linda a former elementary school principal. They looked like the kind of grandparents who baked cookies and attended school plays. "Mr. Reynolds," Robert said, shaking my hand, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting. We know this must be difficult for you, Mr. Williams. I'm sorry for your loss. Regardless of what Beverly did, she was still your daughter." Linda Williams looked directly at Carl. "You're the young man who went to prison with our Beverly." "Yes, ma'am. Tell us what she was like." "The Beverly we knew was a sweet girl who loved animals and wanted to be a teacher. Help us understand how she became someone who could murder an innocent woman." For the next 2 hours, Carl told the Williams family everything he knew about Beverly's involvement with the Inheritance Acceleration Network, how she'd been recruited through online forums, how she'd been trained to identify wealthy elderly targets, how she'd learned to manipulate desperate people like Carl into becoming accomplices. Beverly wasn't born evil, Carl explained. She was recruited by criminals who taught her to see elderly people as nothing more than sources of money. She learned to override her natural empathy and compassion. "But why?" Linda asked. "Beverly had a good job. She came from a loving family. Why would she choose this?" Carl hesitated. "Mrs. Williams, did Beverly ever tell you about her financial problems?" "What financial problems? Beverly always said she was doing well." Beverly had been embezzling money from her employer for 3 years before she met me. She'd stolen over $200,000 from medical billing accounts. She was facing federal prosecution when she disappeared and changed her identity. The Williams family stared at Carl in shock. "That's impossible," Robert said.
Beverly never stole anything. Carl reached into his briefcase and pulled out FBI documents about Beverly's criminal history. "I'm sorry, I thought you knew."
Linda Williams started crying. "Our daughter wasn't the person we thought she was. Mrs. Williams, the daughter you raised, was a good person, but she made a series of choices that led her down a very dark path. The Inheritance Acceleration Network found her when she was desperate and facing prison time. They gave her a way to make money quickly, but it required her to give up her humanity." Robert Williams looked at the documents, then at Carl. "Mr. Reynolds, do you think Beverly felt remorse for what she did?" Carl thought about Beverly's suicide note and her confession that had helped reduce his sentence. "Mr. Williams, I think Beverly felt trapped by the choices she'd made. She couldn't see a way back to being the person you'd raised her to be. And you, do you feel remorse?" "Every day, I participate in Dorothy's murder because I was willing to steal from my mother to pay gambling debts. I'll carry that responsibility for the rest of my life, but you found a way to live with it. I found a way to use it. Everything I do now, the addiction counseling, the prison programs, the foundation work, it's all an attempt to prevent other families from going through what we've all been through." Linda Williams dried her tears and looked at Carl with something that might have been respect. "Mr. Reynolds, thank you for being honest with us. It's painful to learn that Beverly wasn't the person we thought, but it helps us understand what happened." After the Williams family left, Carl and I sat in the empty conference room for a long time. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Sad. They lost their daughter twice, once when she became a criminal, and again when she died in prison. But Dad, I also feel grateful." "Grateful for what?" "Grateful that you didn't give up on me the way they had to give up on Beverly. When I was arrested, when I confessed, when I went to prison, you could have walked away and never looked back. Instead, you gave me the chance to earn my way back into the family. Carl, you earned that chance. You did the work to become someone worth forgiving. Beverly never got that opportunity. She was too far gone by the time she was caught." We drove home to Austin, where Carmen was watching Harry and Emma. The kids were playing in the backyard while Carmen prepared dinner. It was an ordinary Saturday evening with family, the kind of evening I'd taken for granted when Dorothy was alive, and the kind of evening I'd thought I'd never have again after she was murdered. But here we were, 3 generations of family gathered around the dinner table, building new memories on the foundation of old tragedies. It wasn't the family Dorothy had envisioned when Carl was young, but it was a good family, a family that had been tested and broken and rebuilt stronger than before. 5 years later, I was diagnosed with early-stage lung cancer. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd survived my son's betrayal, a criminal organization's threats, and 20 years of helping families recover from cybercrime, only to be brought down by 30 years of smoking cigarettes I'd quit decades too late. The oncologist was optimistic. "Mr. Reynolds, we caught it early. With surgery and chemotherapy, your prognosis is excellent. You're looking at a 95% 5-year survival rate." Carmen took the news better than I did. "Harold, you're going to beat this. And even if you don't, you've had 20 years you almost didn't have. 20 years of watching Carl rebuild his life, 20 years of being a grandfather, 20 years of honoring Dorothy's memory through the foundation." She was right, of course. When Dorothy died, I'd thought my life was essentially over. I was 59 years old, widowed, and had just learned that my son was capable of participating in murder. I'd expected to spend whatever years I had left alone and bitter. Instead, I'd found purpose, new love, and a relationship with Carl that was deeper and more honest than what we'd had before his imprisonment. I'd watched him become a better father to his children than I'd been to him. I'd seen Dorothy's foundation grow from a memorial gesture into a nationally recognized force for protecting elderly Americans. If the cancer killed me tomorrow, I could say I'd lived a full life after Dorothy's death, but I wasn't ready to die yet. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Baylor University Medical Center. Carl took time off from the foundation to drive up from Austin, and we spent the Monday evening before surgery talking about practical matters, wills, foundation succession planning, funeral arrangements. "Dad, are you scared?" Carl asked as we sat on my back porch watching Carmen tend her garden. "I'm concerned about the recovery. I'm worried about leaving Carmen alone. I'm sad that I might not see Harry and Emma grow up, but scared? No, I'm not scared of dying. Why not?" "Carl, I've been living on borrowed time since Dorothy was murdered. Every good thing that's happened since then, our reconciliation, my marriage to Carmen, watching you become a good father, it's all been a gift I didn't expect to receive. What if the surgery doesn't go well? Then I'll have had 20 years I almost didn't get. That's more than most people receive. Carl was quiet for a moment. Dad, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you years ago. What's that? When I was in prison during those first few months when I was angry and scared and convinced my life was over, I planned to kill myself. I turned to look at him. Carl, I had it all figured out, how to do it, when to do it, how to make it look like an accident. So Harry and Emma wouldn't grow up knowing their father was a suicide. I was going to wait until I'd been in prison long enough that it wouldn't look suspicious, then I was going to end it. What stopped you? A letter from you. Do you remember writing to me about the foundation? About how we were helping families protect themselves from the same kind of criminals who'd targeted our family? I remembered it had been about 6 months after Carl's sentencing, when the foundation was still small and struggling to gain credibility with law enforcement agencies. You wrote that Dorothy's death had become meaningful because it was preventing other deaths, that her murder had taught us something about cybercrime that we could use to protect other families. I remember, Dad, that letter saved my life. It gave me hope that maybe my part in Mom's death could somehow be redeemed, that maybe I could find a way to honor her memory even from prison. I reached over and squeezed Carl's shoulder. I'm glad you're alive, son. The world is better with you in it. I hope Mom would think so. I know she would. The surgery went well. The tumor was smaller than expected, completely contained, and the surgeon was confident he'd removed all the cancerous tissue. I spent 3 days in the hospital and 2 weeks recovering at home before starting a mild chemotherapy regimen designed to eliminate any remaining cancer cells. Carmen managed my care with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. She organized my medications, drove me to appointments, and made sure I followed the doctor's orders about rest and nutrition. Carl visited every weekend, sometimes bringing Harry and Emma, sometimes coming alone so we could talk about foundation business or family matters. During one of those solo visits, about 6 months after surgery, Carl brought news that would change everything again. Dad, I have something to tell you. Maria and I are getting back together. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. What? I thought she was still in Honduras doing medical mission work. She's coming back to the States next month. The mission program is being relocated to a clinic in San Antonio, and Maria will be managing the Texas operations. And you're moving to San Antonio? We're all moving to San Antonio. The kids are excited about being closer to their mother, and I can run the Second Chances initiative just as easily from San Antonio as from Austin. Carl, are you sure about this? You and Maria have been apart for almost 4 years. Dad, we never stopped loving each other. We just had different callings that pulled us in different directions, but now those callings are pulling us toward the same place. What about Sophia? She's in college now. Sophia's graduating from UT this spring with a degree in social work. She wants to work with Maria's medical mission program. This reunites the whole family. I was happy for Carl, but the news also meant I'd be losing the daily presence of my grandchildren and the weekly visits with my son. Carmen and I would have to decide whether to follow them to San Antonio or stay in Austin near the Foundation's satellite office. Don't look so worried, Dad. San Antonio is only an hour from Austin. We'll still see you all the time. It's not the same as having you down the street. No, it's not. But Dad, you taught me that family isn't about proximity. It's about commitment. You and I were separated by anger and disappointment for years, but we found our way back to each other. A little geographical distance isn't going to change anything. 3 months later, Carl's family moved to San Antonio. Maria returned from Honduras looking older and wiser with stories about the medical work she'd done and the lives she'd helped save. The kids were thrilled to have their mother back, and Carl was happier than I'd seen him since before his gambling addiction destroyed his first attempt at adult life. Carmen and I visited every other weekend. We watched Harry play Little League Baseball and Emma perform in dance recitals. We attended family dinners where Carl and Maria would tell stories about their work, his with former prisoners, hers with underserved communities along the border. On one of those visits, as we sat around the dinner table after Harry's 13th birthday party, I looked at the faces of my family and felt something I hadn't experienced since before Dorothy's death: complete contentment. Carl had found his way back to love and purposeful work. Maria was using her medical skills to help people who had no other access to health care. The children were happy, healthy, and growing up with a clear understanding of right and wrong. Carmen and I had built a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values. Dorothy wasn't there to see it, but her influence was everywhere. in Carl's commitment to helping others, in the Foundation's work protecting vulnerable families, in the way we all tried to live lives that honored her memory. 2 years after my cancer treatment ended, I was declared officially cured. The 5-year survival milestone had passed, and my oncologist assured me that the likelihood of recurrence was now statistically negligible. At 79 years old, I was healthier than I had any right to expect. The Dorothy Reynolds Foundation had grown beyond my wildest expectations. We now operated in 15 states, had helped over 25,000 families protect themselves from cybercrime, and had recovered more than $400 million in stolen assets. The Second Chances Initiative had expanded to 30 prison systems and had achieved an 83% success rate in preventing recidivism among participants. But perhaps the most satisfying development was that the foundation had become truly independent of my leadership. Carmen served as executive director, Jennifer Patterson had become our chief legal counsel and was being groomed as Carmen's successor, and Carl managed all our educational and prevention programs from his base in San Antonio. I was officially retired, though I still attended board meetings and occasionally spoke at conferences about cybercrime prevention. Mostly, though, I spent my time being a grandfather and enjoying the quiet life with Carmen that Dorothy and I had never had the chance to experience. That quiet life was interrupted on a Thursday morning in October when Carl called with news that would bring our story full circle one final time. "Dad, I just got a call from the FBI. They've arrested someone in connection with the Inheritance Acceleration Network. Someone who was Beverly's trainer. I thought they'd caught everyone involved in that organization. They thought so too, but this is someone who was operating at a higher level. The person who actually created the automotive hacking software and taught people like Beverly how to use it. Who is it? His name is Dr. Richard Coleman. He's a former automotive engineer who worked for General Motors for 20 years before he turned to cybercrime. The FBI thinks he's responsible for developing the hacking methods used in at least 50 murders over the past decade, including Dorothy's. Yes, Dad, they want us to testify at his trial, both of us." The trial of Dr. Richard Coleman became the most significant cybercrime prosecution in American history. Coleman was charged with 50 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and operating a criminal enterprise. The prosecution alleged that Coleman had created a network of killers who targeted wealthy elderly Americans using automotive hacking methods he developed and taught them. Coleman was 67 years old, a brilliant engineer who had turned his expertise in automotive computer systems into a murder-for-hire operation. He'd recruited desperate people like Beverly and trained them to identify wealthy targets, hack their financial accounts, and then kill them using malware that overrode their car's safety systems. The financial scope of Coleman's operation was staggering. Over 10 years, his network had murdered at least 50 people and stolen over $200 million. Coleman had taken a percentage of each theft, accumulating a personal fortune of $15 million while living quietly in a suburb of Detroit. During the trial, Carl and I both testified about Dorothy's death and Beverly's role in Coleman's network. Carl spoke about how Beverly had manipulated his gambling addiction to turn him into an unwitting accomplice. I testified about the technical aspects of the automotive hacking and the pattern of financial fraud that had preceded Dorothy's murder. But the most powerful testimony came from the families of Coleman's other victims. One by one, they told the jury about elderly parents and grandparents who had died in suspicious car accidents, only to have their financial accounts emptied within days of their deaths. Dr. Coleman didn't just steal money. One victim's daughter testified. He stole all the time our family should have had together. He stole Christmas dinners and birthday parties and conversations we'll never have. He stole the wisdom and love that our elderly family members could have shared with younger generations. Coleman showed no remorse throughout the trial. He sat at the defense table with the detached expression of someone reviewing technical specifications rather than listening to testimony about the murders he'd orchestrated. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Coleman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 500 additional years for the financial crimes. After the sentencing, Carl and I met with several other families who had lost relatives to Coleman's network. We talked about the long process of healing from this kind of betrayal and loss, and about the ways we'd each found to honor our dead loved ones' memories. "Mr. Reynolds," one woman said to me, "how did you find the strength to forgive your son for his part in your wife's death?" "I didn't forgive him for what he did," I replied. "I forgave him for who he became afterward. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about deciding that the relationship is more important than the resentment. And how do you know when someone deserves forgiveness? I looked at Carl, who was talking quietly with a group of other family members about the foundation's work. You know when they've done the work to become someone worth forgiving. That evening, as Carl and I drove back to Austin after the trial, we stopped at a small cemetery outside Dallas. Dorothy's grave was there in the section we'd moved her to 5 years earlier so she could be closer to family. The headstone was the same simple granite marker, but now it was surrounded by a small garden that Carmen maintained and visited weekly. Yellow roses, Dorothy's favorite, bloomed alongside daffodils and tulips that marked the changing seasons. "Mom, we got him," Carl said quietly, kneeling beside the headstone. "We got the man who taught Beverly how to kill you. We got all of them." I placed a hand on Carl's shoulder. "Your mother would be proud of the work you did to help the FBI catch Coleman. Do you really think so?" "Carl, you've spent the last 18 years of your life trying to prevent other families from going through what we went through. You've helped hundreds of former addicts rebuild their lives. You've spoken to thousands of people about the warning signs of financial fraud. Every person you've helped is a tribute to your mother's memory. I just wish she could see Harry and Emma. She would have loved being their grandmother." She is their grandmother, Carl. Every story you tell them about her, every lesson you teach them that came from her example, every moment of love and wisdom you share with them, that's Dorothy being a grandmother. We sat in the quiet cemetery as the sun set over the Texas countryside. 3 generations of family, Dorothy resting in the earth, Carl and me sitting beside her grave, and Harry and Emma growing up in San Antonio with their parents' love and their great-grandmother's legacy. "Dad, what do you think happens next?" Carl asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've caught all the people responsible for Mom's death. The foundation is successful and self-sustaining. Coleman is in prison forever. What comes next for our family?" I looked at the yellow roses Carmen had planted around Dorothy's grave, then at my son's face in the fading light. "What comes next is life, Carl. Normal, ordinary, beautiful life. Family dinners and birthday parties and watching Harry and Emma grow up, Carmen and I growing old together. You and Maria building something good in San Antonio. That's what comes next. After everything we've been through, normal life sounds perfect. Normal life, as it turned out, was more wonderful than I'd remembered." Carmen and I settled into the rhythm of retirement, morning coffee on the back porch, afternoon visits to the foundation office, evening dinners with books and quiet conversation. We traveled some minus, a cruise to Alaska that Dorothy had always wanted to take, a trip to Ireland to trace Carmen's family history, a week in Colorado visiting old friends from my Army Reserve days. But mostly we stayed close to home, available for the constant stream of family events that mark the passage of time when you're blessed with grandchildren. Harry graduated from high school at 17, a serious young man who'd inherited Dorothy's compassion and Carl's determination to help people. He was accepted to the University of Texas with plans to study computer science and cybersecurity. Emma was 14 now, a dancer and artist who reminded everyone of Dorothy's creative spirit. "Grandpa Harold," Emma said during one of our Sunday dinners in San Antonio, "will you tell me again about Grandma Dorothy's garden?" This had become a tradition, Emma asking for stories about the great-grandmother she'd never met, me finding new ways to keep Dorothy's memory alive for children who knew her only through photographs and family stories. "Your Grandma Dorothy had the most beautiful vegetable garden," I began. Every spring, she'd spend weeks planning what to plant where. Tomatoes in the back because they grew tall, lettuce in the front because it stayed small, herbs along the border because their smell kept bugs away. Did she grow roses too? Yellow roses, they were her favorite? She said yellow roses meant friendship and joy, and those were the 2 things she wanted her garden to represent. Emma nodded solemnly. "That's why Grandma Carmen plants yellow roses at Grandma Dorothy's grave." Exactly. Carl, who had been listening while helping Maria clear the dinner dishes, sat back down at the table. "Dad, there's something I've been thinking about. Something I want to discuss with the whole family." "What's that?" "The foundation is approaching its 20th anniversary. Carmen and Jennifer have been talking about ways to commemorate the milestone. They want to establish a permanent endowment that will ensure the foundation can continue operating indefinitely." Carmen leaned forward. "We've calculated that a $50 million endowment would generate enough annual income to fund all our current programs in perpetuity." "That's a substantial amount of money," I said. "It is," Carl agreed. "But Dad, we have the resources to do it. The foundation has accumulated significant reserves over the years. Plus, there are potential donor opportunities we haven't fully explored." Maria joined the conversation. "Carl and I have also been talking about our long-term plans. The medical mission work is important, but I'm 52 years old now. I won't be able to do field work forever. What are you thinking? We're thinking about coming back to Austin. There's an opportunity to establish a community health clinic that would serve low-income families in East Austin. It would combine my medical background with Carl's experience in addiction counseling and life skills training. Carl nodded. We could work together again, but in a different way, Maria providing medical care, me providing financial counseling and addiction support. And it would bring us closer to you and Carmen, Emma added. I miss living near my grandparents. I looked around the table at my family. 3 generations sitting together, planning a future that honored Dorothy's memory while building something new and meaningful. It was exactly the kind of family gathering Dorothy would have loved. What would you need from me? I asked. Your blessing, Carl said simply, and maybe your advice about how to structure the clinic partnership with the foundation. Over the next 6 months, we worked together to establish the Dorothy Reynolds Community Health and Wellness Center. The foundation provided startup funding and ongoing support for the financial counseling programs. Carl and Maria moved back to Austin, buying a house just 10 minutes from Carmen and me. Harry transferred to UT's Austin campus to be closer to family during his final 2 years of college. The clinic opened on a Tuesday morning in March, exactly 20 years after Dorothy's death. We held a small dedication ceremony in the clinic's main waiting room, with foundation staff, community leaders, and families from East Austin who would benefit from the clinic's services. Carl spoke about Dorothy's legacy and the journey that had brought us to this moment. 20 years ago, my mother, Dorothy Reynolds, was murdered by criminals who saw elderly Americans as easy targets for financial fraud. Her death could have been just another statistic in the growing epidemic of cybercrime against seniors. Instead, her death became the foundation for everything we've built since then. The Dorothy Reynolds Foundation has protected thousands of families from the same criminals who killed my mother. This clinic will extend that protection by addressing the underlying vulnerabilities, poverty, lack of access to healthcare, financial illiteracy, that make people targets for predators. My mother was a pediatric nurse who dedicated her life to helping vulnerable people. This clinic continues that work in her memory. After the ceremony, I walked through the clinic with Carmen, looking at the examination rooms where Maria would provide medical care, the classroom where Carl would teach financial literacy, and the counseling offices where addiction specialists would help people rebuild their lives. In the main hallway, there was a photograph of Dorothy in her nursing uniform, smiling the warm smile that had comforted thousands of sick children over her 23-year career. Below the photograph was a plaque with words that captured everything we'd learned about love, loss, and redemption. Dorothy Reynolds believed that every person deserves compassion, second chances, and the opportunity to build a better life. This clinic continues her work. That evening, our whole family gathered at the house on Maple Street, the house where Dorothy had lived and died, and where Carmen and I had built a new life together. We sat around the dinner table where Dorothy had served thousands of meals, and we talked about the future. Harry was excited about his summer internship with the Foundation's cybersecurity team. Emma was planning to volunteer at the clinic's youth programs. Carl and Maria were settling into their new roles at the clinic. Carmen was transitioning to emeritus status at the foundation, while remaining involved in strategic planning. What about you, Dad? Carl asked. What are your plans for the next chapter? I looked around the table at the faces of my family, then out the window at the garden where Carmen grew the flowers Dorothy had loved. I want to watch you all build something beautiful, I said. I want to see Harry and Emma grow up to be the kind of people Dorothy would have been proud of. I want to watch the clinic help families build better lives. I want to enjoy whatever time Carmen and I have left together. That sounds perfect, Emma said. It does, I agreed. After everything we've been through, perfect sounds just right. 5 years later, I was 84 years old and watching my great-grandson take his first steps across the living room of Carl and Maria's house. Little Dorothy, named after her great-great-grandmother, was Harry's daughter, born when he was 25 and working as a cybersecurity analyst for the FBI. She had Dorothy's dark hair and curious eyes, and she reminded me every day that love doesn't die, it just finds new forms. Harry had married his college sweetheart, Anna, a social worker who specialized in helping elderly victims of financial crimes. They'd met at a foundation conference, bonded over their shared commitment to protecting vulnerable populations, and built a marriage that combined his technical expertise with her compassion for victims. It was exactly the kind of partnership Dorothy would have loved to see. Emma, now 19, was studying nursing at UT with plans to work in pediatric care like her great-grandmother. She volunteered at the Dorothy Reynolds Community Health Center every summer, helping with children's programs and learning from Maria about serving underserved communities. Grandpa Harold, Emma said as we watched little Dorothy toddle around the room, "Do you think great-grandma Dorothy would be proud of our family?" I looked around the room at 4 generations of family. Harry playing with his daughter while Anna finished nursing school assignments at the kitchen table. Emma reading a medical textbook between bursts of babysitting enthusiasm. Carl and Maria discussing expansion plans for the clinic. Carmen reviewing foundation grant applications. Emma, I think your great-grandmother would be amazed by what this family became, even after everything that happened, even after Daddy's mistakes. Emma knew the full story now. Carl's gambling addiction, his participation in Beverly's scheme, his imprisonment, and his long journey back to redemption. She'd learned it gradually as she grew older, always in age-appropriate ways, always with the emphasis on learning from mistakes rather than being defined by them. Especially after everything that happened, I said, your great-grandmother believed in second chances. She believed people could change if they were willing to do the work. Your father proved her right. Carl, overhearing our conversation, came over and sat next to us on the couch. At 54, he was graying at the temples but looked younger than his years. The weight of guilt and shame that had aged him prematurely in his 30s had been replaced by the satisfaction of meaningful work and family love. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," Carl said. "Next year marks the 25th anniversary of Mom's death. I want to do something special to commemorate it." "What did you have in mind?" "I want to take the whole family to Hawaii. Mom always wanted to see the sunrise over Diamond Head. She had a travel magazine picture on her desk at work for years, the view from the crater at dawn." Carmen looked up from her grant applications. "Harold, do you remember that picture? Dorothy talked about going to Hawaii for our 30th anniversary. She wanted to hike Diamond Head and watch the sunrise." I remembered. Dorothy had planned elaborate trips we never took, collected travel brochures for destinations we never visited, saved money for adventures that got redirected to Carl's emergencies or household repairs. She'd lived a small, careful life of service to others, never indulging her own dreams of travel and adventure. I think that's a beautiful idea, Carl. But why Hawaii? Why now? Because I want to take Mom's ashes to the place she always wanted to visit. I want to scatter some of them at Diamond Head during the sunrise she never got to see. Carl, your mother is buried in Austin. Dad, I know her body is in Austin. But her spirit has been traveling with us all these years. In the Foundation's work, in the clinic's mission, in the way we've raised Harry and Emma, and now little Dorothy. I want to take that spirit to the place she dreamed about. Carmen reached over and took my hand. "Harold, what do you think?" I thought about Dorothy's travel dreams, deferred for decades in service of family responsibilities. I thought about the picture on her desk and the magazines she'd hidden in her nightstand. I thought about the adventures she'd planned but never taken. I think Dorothy would love to finally see Hawaii. 3 months later, our entire family gathered at the Honolulu airport. Harry had driven down from Dallas with Anna and baby Dorothy. Emma had flown in from college. Carl, Maria, and Sophia had come from Austin. Carmen and I had made the trip despite my doctor's concerns about my stamina at 84. We rented a house on the beach in Waikiki and spent a week doing all the tourist things Dorothy had read about in her travel magazines. We visited Pearl Harbor and the Polynesian Cultural Center. We drove around Oahu looking at beaches and botanical gardens. Emma learned to surf. Harry took his daughter to the aquarium. Carmen and Maria shopped for souvenirs Dorothy would have loved. But the most important moment came on our last morning when we hiked Diamond Head before dawn. The trail was steep and challenging, especially for an 84-year-old man with a history of lung cancer. But Harry and Carl helped me up the rocky path, and Carmen carried the small urn that contained some of Dorothy's ashes. We reached the crater rim just as the eastern horizon began to lighten. As the sun rose over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, we stood together in silence, remembering Dorothy and honoring the journey that had brought us to this moment. "Dorothy," I said quietly, "you finally made it to Hawaii." Carl opened the urn and scattered Dorothy's ashes into the trade winds that carried them out over the ocean. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the crater and the city below, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the day Dorothy died: complete peace. The anger was gone. The grief had transformed into gratitude. The questions about justice and forgiveness had been answered through 25 years of living well and helping others. Dorothy's murder had been solved. Her killers had been punished. Her death had been transformed into a force for protecting other families. Her love lived on in the children and grandchildren who carried her values forward. As we walked back down the mountain together, 4 generations of family united by love and tested by tragedy, I knew Dorothy's story was complete. Not because it had ended, but because it had become something beautiful. The foundation would continue its work. The clinic would serve its community. Harry and Anna would raise their daughter with the values Dorothy had taught. Emma would become a nurse and heal children the way Dorothy had. Carl would keep helping people rebuild their lives after addiction and crime. And I would spend whatever time I had left grateful for the unexpected gift of watching broken things become whole again. Dorothy's death had taken her from us, but Dorothy's love had brought us back together, stronger than before in the end. Love won, love always wins. Come on, Grandpa, Emma said, taking my arm as we navigated the steeper parts of the trail. Let's go home, home. Where Dorothy's pictures lined the walls and her yellow roses bloomed in the garden and her great-granddaughter played with toys while her parents planned a future built on the foundation she'd laid. Yes, let's go home. I learned that the most dangerous enemies aren't strangers who break into your house. They're the people who already have keys to your front door and access to your heart because they know exactly how to use your love against you. But I also learned that family isn't just about blood or shared DNA. It's about the people who stand by you when everything falls apart, who help you rebuild what was broken, and who choose to love you through your worst mistakes and darkest moments.